The pattern beneath the noise. May 29, 2026. 3:41 a.m. local time. A technician at the Escape Control Center, the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder, sits alone in the dim blue light of the observation room, half watching the stream of incoming telemetry while finishing the dregs of a cold coffee. Routine monitoring. The night sky above the Murchison Desert is perfectly clear, the instruments running their scheduled deep space survey of the outer solar system, a region around Saturn's trailing hemisphere, where a faint dust arc had recently been mapped. Nothing unusual. Until the line graph jumps. A spike. Sharp. Narrow. Frequency, 1420.405751777 MHz. The hydrogen line. At first, it looks like interference. Maybe a reflected Earth satellite, maybe a passing aircraft. But the signal repeats. Perfectly regular. A pulse every 19 hours, 11 minutes, and 6 seconds. Too long to be mechanical interference, too short to be natural cosmic rotation. When the automated RFI, radio frequency interference, filter runs, it fails to flag the signal. It's not terrestrial. By dawn, the Escape data team has logged 3 full cycles of the pulse. They label it provisionally. Janus_P1, unclassified periodic narrowband event. The name Janus comes from the apparent point of origin, a small irregular moon of Saturn, one of the least interesting bodies in the solar system. It's a lump of ice and rock about 180 kilometers across, orbiting near Epimetheus. Nothing there should be broadcasting. June 1, 2026. Cross-verification begins. ALMA, the Atacama Large Millimeter/Submillimeter Array in Chile, turns its attention to the coordinates. They detect the same pulse, faint but coherent. In Spain, the Madrid Deep Space Communications Complex picks it up as well. China's FAST telescope confirms it 2 days later. For independent observatories, 3 continents, 1 frequency. And then someone notices the strangest part. The frequency is not exactly constant. It's subtly modulated, not random noise, but deliberate shifts in phase. When mapped, those phase variations form a repeating mathematical structure. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19. The first 16 prime numbers, encoded in light-speed intervals. You can't get that by accident. At the SETI Institute, senior signal analyst Dr. Amira Lasker is the first to say the word artificial AI. During a closed Zoom call with NASA Goddard engineers, she hesitates before she says it, then immediately apologizes, like saying it might break something. I know how this sounds, but the modulation pattern isn't astrophysical. It's not pulsar timing, not Doppler drift, not plasma lensing. It's structured. It's intentional. The silence on the call lasts for nearly 10 seconds before someone changes the subject. Within hours, an internal memorandum circulates inside NASA's internal network, Preliminary Analysis, Janus, P1. Most of it is routine technical language about signal verification and Doppler corrections. But one line, near the end, is underlined in red. Source cannot be explained through known natural mechanisms. Further public communication discouraged until interagency review. June 4, 2026. The memo leaks. It first appears on an obscure Reddit astronomy forum. Then on Twitter. Then in the science press. Within a day, major outlets are running the story. NASA detects alien transmission near Saturn. Signal from Janus, new wow. Moment for humanity. NASA scrambles to respond. By evening, they release a press statement calling it the calibration anomaly, radio reflections between spacecraft and Earth-based satellites, misinterpreted as a deep space signal. Except it isn't. Because on June 5th, the pulse changes. For the first time since discovery, Janus P1's frequency drifts upward by exactly 0.002%. It's small, but meaningful. That drift matches the expected Doppler compensation an intelligent transmitter would apply if it understood its own orbital motion around Saturn, a correction to maintain a fixed reference frequency toward an external observer. In other words, it's adjusting itself to stay clear for us. The next morning, SETI analysts run a differential analysis between the May 29th and June 5th pulses. The second signal contains subtle phase jitter not present before. When converted into binary and mapped visually, it produces a recognizable image, not a picture, but a wave envelope, an oscillation repeating at the exact orbital period of Janus itself. A scientist at the Australian National University, Dr. Miguel Ramos, writes in a private email later leaked to journalists. If the data holds, we're looking at a self-referential signal. It's broadcasting its own orbit. That's not something the universe does by chance. By June 6th, the panic begins to spread quietly through the research community. Nobody's saying extraterrestrial, but nobody's ruling it out either. NASA and ESA hold an unscheduled joint teleconference. Only the first 10 minutes are ever made public. The rest, more than 2 hours, remain classified under ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations. That night, the Goddard Space Flight Center uploads a temporary access restriction on all Janus P1 datasets. External access denied. But the astronomers who already downloaded the early data begin sharing it through encrypted private servers. Amateur radio observatories confirm the pulse independently. It's real. And it's still broadcasting. June 10, 2026. The second anomaly occurs. The pulse lengthens by 1 microsecond, a tiny change, yet precise enough to be deliberate. Dr. Lasker posts a cryptic message on her private account before deleting it 10 minutes later. Someone, or something, just adjusted for our listening distance. From this point on, the official narrative shifts. NASA begins referring to Janus P1 as a local telemetry reflection event. ESA calls it a transient data artifact. China releases nothing. But inside the quiet laboratories, under non-disclosure agreements and government monitoring, scientists keep replaying the pattern, analyzing every waveform, every fraction of noise. They all arrive at the same conclusion. There's structure beneath the signal. Something that feels less like a transmission, and more like a heartbeat. A signal from under the permafrost. 3 employees of the Borealis 6 Arctic station took turns sleeping. In the middle of November, the night lasts almost 20 hours, and even the dim light of the instruments seemed dazzling. When the engineer on duty, Michael Grondel, went out to check the telemetry from the radar, he noticed that an uncharacteristic green line was flashing on one of the screens. At first, he thought it was noise from the ionosphere. Here, at latitude 73 degrees, interference from the aurora occurred frequently. But after a few minutes, the signal was repeated, and with the same structure, 23 pulses, then a pause of 11 seconds and again 23 pulses. The station's server automatically recorded all on-air data, but Grondel turned on manual recording and applied an interference filter. After clearing the spectrum, a clear frequency pattern appeared on the monitor, as if someone was sending a binary message on ultra-long waves. The source, judging by the direction of the antenna, was underground. At a depth of 3 kilometers under the station lay an old research mine, mothballed back in 1989. That's where the coordinates of the signal converged, according to the calculations of the system. Grondel radioed the station's head, Inga Setter, and she, knowing his pedantry, arrived 5 minutes later without turning on the lights. The two of them watched as the signal was repeated, gradually changing its amplitude, as if it was responding to the presence of the receiver. Inga made an entry in the observation log. From 2:14 to 3:02, a repeating series of pulses with a frequency of 11.7 Hz is recorded. The direction is underground, the angle of incidence is 63 degrees. Ionospheric activity is low. Exclude atmospheric origin. In the morning, they sent a report to the Norwegian Institute of Geophysics. The response came 2 days later, but instead of analyzing the data, there was an order to suspend surveillance and not spread about the recorded signals. The document was marked secret and digitally signed by the Ministry of Defense. Meanwhile, under the ice, at a depth of 1 kilometer, the Drake 7 automatic drilling system, used for climate research, began to record an abnormal heat flow. A weak source of infrared radiation appeared in the ice column, stable, with a temperature of about 40 degrees Celsius. It seemed as if some kind of generator had turned on under the permafrost. At night, Grondel violated the order and connected the old ground-penetrating radar. The shape of an oval dome, clearly not of geological origin, slowly appeared on the screen. There were perfectly smooth contours along its edge, as if polished from the inside. And the moment the radar reached the center of the object, the signal disappeared. All the station's instruments went out instantly, and a dull metallic clang was heard outside the laboratory walls, as if someone had hit a thick layer of ice from inside. Inga and Michael were silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "This is not geological activity." The next day, the connection to the Borealis 6 station was lost. The last record received from telemetry contained only the line, "Echo accepted. A response is expected." The silence of ice. The last transmission from Borealis 6 was received at 4:17 Universal Time Coordinated. After that, only static. For the next 48 hours, every attempt to re-establish contact failed. The Arctic Communication Network reported complete loss of carrier signal, as if the station had been erased from existence. 2 days later, the Norwegian Air Force dispatched a reconnaissance drone, model MQ-19 Natvind. The drone approached the coordinates through a curtain of magnetic interference that made GPS almost useless. When it finally reached visual range, the operators saw nothing but a vast, glassy field of ice. The station buildings, the radar domes, even the solar panels, gone. All that remained was a circular depression, 70 meters wide, its edges perfectly symmetrical, as though carved with surgical precision. Infrared imaging revealed faint residual heat at the center of the crater. Not from fire, the thermal signature was too uniform, too clean. It resembled the footprint of something that had emitted energy without combustion, like a reactor that had been quietly switched off. The footage was transmitted to the Defense Ministry and then classified within an hour. A closed meeting was held in Oslo. Among those invited was Dr. Arvid Lehmann, a physicist specializing in low-frequency resonance phenomena. He had worked with NASA years earlier on seismic communication systems, but what caught his attention in the Borealis data was the frequency, 11.7 Hz, a resonance impossibly close to the Schumann baseline, the frequency of the Earth's own electromagnetic heartbeat. If that signal originated underground, Lane said during the briefing, it wasn't just broadcasting. It was synchronizing, tuning itself to the planet's resonance. Like a key matching a lock. No one in the room spoke. The atmosphere was thick with a kind of bureaucratic dread, the silence that only forms when people know the implications but don't want to say them aloud.
3 days later, a special research convoy reached the site by icebreaker. The depression had already begun to refreeze, but instruments detected something beneath the surface, a hollow cavity, extending down for nearly 1.4 kilometers. The shape matched the radar echo from Borealis SIX's last scans, a dome with internal chambers. When the drilling team lowered a camera probe into the cavity, the feed showed smooth walls of black glass-like material. Along the curvature of one wall, faint symbols glowed for a moment, then faded as if reacting to the light. The camera lost signal shortly after. Back at the control tent, the operator rewound the footage frame by frame. On one of the frozen frames, a pattern could be seen, not letters, but sequences of geometric shapes, circles within circles, each slightly misaligned, forming a spiraling lattice. Dr. Lane looked at the pattern for a long time before whispering, "This isn't a structure. It's a transceiver. It's listening." That night, the temperature dropped to -47 degrees Celsius. As the crew slept in their tents, the magnetometer spiked without warning. A low hum spread through the ice, inaudible to human ears but captured by the instruments as a pulsing waveform, repeating every 11 seconds. At 3:02 local time, Every compass needle within a 50-kilometer radius turned toward the crater. And then the signal returned. The resonance protocol. By dawn, the research camp was silent. Snow drifted between the tents, the air thick with static electricity that made hair stand on end. Inside the command module, half the monitors showed only interference, green lines trembling over black backgrounds. Yet through the noise, a pattern began to emerge, faint but unmistakable, a pulse repeating at 11.7 Hz, forming what looked almost like a heartbeat. Dr. Arvid Lane had not slept in 30 hours. His eyes were fixed on the spectrogram, watching how the signal oscillated between two precise amplitudes. It wasn't random. It was language. At 6:11 Universal Time Coordinated, the first anomaly occurred. A seismometer, located 3 kilometers west of the site, began registering tremors, not vertical, but horizontal, like a vibration spreading through the crust. The amplitude increased rhythmically, syncing perfectly with the pulse pattern from the Borealis crater. "It's modulating the ground," Lane whispered. "Not shaking it, tuning it." He adjusted the gain, and for a brief second, the pattern aligned into a harmonic spectrum, 7 narrow bands of resonance that mirrored the structure of human brain waves. Alpha, beta, theta. The signal was, somehow, mimicking biological frequencies. Outside, the wind fell dead still. The hum under the ice deepened into a tone, so low it could be felt more than heard. One of the technicians, Astrid Lund, stepped outside without her coat, walking slowly toward the crater as if sleepwalking. Her eyes were open, but she didn't respond when others shouted her name. By the time 2 men reached her, she was standing at the rim, motionless, her breath fogging the air. "It's calling," she said softly. "It wants to be understood." Her voice was calm, detached, like she was repeating something that wasn't hers. When they brought her back inside, medical instruments recorded a mild increase in neural synchronization, both hemispheres of her brain firing in unison, a pattern rarely seen outside of deep meditation or seizures. But Astrid was awake. Aware. Staring at the screens with a faint smile. Later that evening, the command module received a packet of encrypted instructions from Oslo. It carried a new classification label, Directive Borealis Theta. The orders were short and absolute. Cease all communication. Destroy recording media. Evacuate within 12 hours. But by then, it was already too late. At 21:03, the power grid collapsed for the entire outpost. The backup generators refused to start, their circuits overloaded by an unknown feedback current. Outside, the aurora ignited in silence, pale green at first, then shifting to violet and deep crimson. It wasn't like any aurora they'd seen before. The light moved in geometric arcs, forming concentric circles that mirrored the patterns from the underground structure. The team watched, spellbound, as the snow around the crater began to vibrate. No wind, no sound, only the resonance, traveling through the ice like a pulse through glass. Instruments captured rising electromagnetic flux, spreading outward in perfect lines. Then, for precisely 11 seconds, every human energy in the camp synced with the signal. Every thought went quiet. Every mind alive. Under that stillness, across the static, across the hum of the frozen world, a voice emerged. Not through speakers. Not through air. Through resonance. A whisper, cold and untranslatable, yet every person understood it in their own language. "You have been heard." The lights went out. The pattern that shouldn't exist. 2 weeks after the Borealis incident, the world still knew nothing. Officially, the station had been lost due to a catastrophic methane explosion beneath the ice shelf. The explanation was vague, technical enough to sound credible, and entirely false. In a secure facility beneath Kjeller Air Base, 40 kilometers east of Oslo, a small task group gathered in a windowless briefing room known internally as Sublevel 3 Theta Wing. Only 7 people were cleared to enter. Each had been pulled from different scientific disciplines: physics, neurobiology, linguistics, and cryptography. On the table before them lay a single hard drive, recovered from the black box of a downed research drone. It contained the last 6 minutes of transmission from Borealis 6. Dr. Arvid Lane sat at the far end, pale and sleepless. He had been flown back from the Arctic under medical escort, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling from something between exhaustion and fear. He hadn't spoken since the evacuation, only muttering one phrase the entire flight: "It wasn't noise. It was feedback. At 9:17, the lead technician loaded the recovered file. The screen flickered, and the spectacle appeared, a dense forest of vertical bands. But when the data was slowed by a factor of 10, the pattern resolved into something entirely different. A waveform too structured to be natural. Too perfect to be random. The lines began to curve, forming intricate symmetrical shapes, like letters from the alphabet no human had ever used. Yet there was rhythm, syntax, even repetition. The linguist, Dr. Janet Earthbound, leaned forward and whispered. It's recursive, it's repeating within itself. Like DNA. She ran a Fourier transform on the signal. Within the harmonics, nested deep beneath the primary frequency, another layer appeared, a submodulation encoded at 7.83 Hz, the same base resonance as the Earth's electromagnetic cavity. When they reconstructed the hidden layer into audio, the room filled with a low, harmonic vibration. Not music. Not static. Something between a tone and a breath. It's alive, someone said quietly. The sound caused the monitors to flicker, not from power issues, but interference. Every device in the lab began to resonate, humming faintly in sync with the tone. The room's temperature dropped by 2 degrees. Dr. Lane finally spoke. His voice was dry, almost detached. This isn't a transmission from below. It's a reflection. The Earth responded. The signal turned the crust itself into an antenna. The room fell silent. On the central monitor, the waveform continued looping, but now the visual feed began to distort, the static bending into geometric spirals. At frame 428, the image froze. The pattern had stabilized into what looked like a face, not human, not even biological, but fractal, like a consciousness expressed through mathematics. And in that frozen frame, hidden in the lower right corner of the data stream, a timestamp appeared, one that didn't match the system clock. It read, T11, reinitiation sequence pending. The team stared at it. The linguist broke the silence first. Pending what? No one answered. Moments later, every light in the facility flickered. The vibration returned, faint, rhythmic, familiar. 11.7 Hz. The same pulse. The same heartbeat. A technician glanced at his watch, it had stopped. Outside, the aurora was visible again, even this far south, a crimson spiral over the Norwegian sky, moving not with the wind but with intention. Dr. Lane whispered, almost to himself. It's reawakening. And somewhere, deep beneath the ice, the signal pulsed once more. Not from what remained of Borealis 6, but from a new location. Thousands of kilometers away. The awakening field. The first reports came from places that had nothing to do with the Arctic. A weather balloon over northern India, a seismograph station in Patagonia, a magnetic observatory in Alaska, all registered identical anomalies within hours of each other. Each system recorded a low-frequency pulse oscillating at 11.7 Hz, repeating every 47 seconds. At first, it looked like interference. Then, when researchers began to synchronize their datasets, something impossible emerged, the pulses were coherent. Every signal on every continent peaked at the same instant, perfectly synchronized across thousands of kilometers, as if the entire planet had been struck by a silent metronome. By the end of the second week, the phenomenon had a name. The awakening field. At CERN, the Large Hadron Collider's superconducting magnets began tripping their sensors without cause. At Mauna Kea, telescopes lost guidance for several seconds each night as if the sky itself had shifted by a fraction of a degree. Bird migration patterns over the Pacific veered thousands of miles off course, their navigation systems overwhelmed by magnetic distortion. And in hospitals across Scandinavia, patients with deep brain implants reported auditory hallucinations, tones that doctors couldn't detect but the patients described identically. A low hum, like something breathing under the ground. In Geneva, a closed-door emergency session of the European Science Council convened under the title Project Lucent. Delegates from 12 countries attended, including Dr. Arvid Lane, now pale and withdrawn, still carrying the trauma of Borealis. He stood before the projection screen displaying the global resonance map. The pulsations were no longer random, they were forming a network, a web of frequency nodes clustering around certain coordinates, Iceland, Siberia, the Himalayas, and one deep beneath the Pacific. These aren't epicenters, Lane said quietly. their anchors. Someone asked what he meant. "It's not coming from Earth," he continued. "It's coming through it. We're part of a circuit." A murmur filled the room. Lane displayed a slide comparing the signal's spatial distribution with geological data, ancient impact craters, tectonic faults, and volcanic rifts. The match was exact. Wherever Earth's crust was thinnest, the pulses concentrated. Like the planet itself was conducting an external current. Then came the first visual event. On October 19, 2025, just before dawn, a meteorological satellite over the South Atlantic captured a column of light piercing the cloud cover, a narrow spiral of ionized plasma extending upward from the ocean, twisting like a slow vortex. At its core was a spectral glow, shifting through blue, violet, and deep crimson, the same impossible combination first seen at Borealis. The footage was immediately classified, but sailors aboard the Norwegian cargo ship Astrid saw it with their own eyes. One described it in a debriefing later to journalists. It wasn't lightning. It was like the sea opened, and something below was signaling that. Within 12 hours, the same phenomenon was reported in the Indian Ocean, then off the coast of Chile. Every event matched the pulse cycle, appearing for exactly 47 seconds before vanishing. At 3:12 Universal Time coordinated on October 22nd, seismic stations across the planet logged a global microquake, magnitude 2.1, uniform, simultaneous. The entire crust of the Earth vibrated together. No tectonic explanation could account for it. And in that moment, for precisely 47 seconds, the awakening field changed frequency. From 11.7 Hz to 13.0. The shift propagated instantly across the globe. In the control rooms of observatories, in the basements of data centers, in the sealed chambers of quantum computers, every instrument tuned to that frequency froze, then rebooted. Several machines didn't restart at all. By morning, Dr. Lane received a secure message from an anonymous satellite operator in Japan. Attached was a high-resolution infrared image taken above the Barents Sea. It showed a vast heat anomaly beneath the ice, a ring nearly 60 kilometers wide. The coordinates matched the last known position of Borealis 6. Inside the ring was a dark core colder than the surrounding ice, as if something below was absorbing heat rather than emitting it. A void. A cavity that hadn't existed before. The transmission ended with a single line of text, and signed, "No timestamp." The structure was green. When Lane showed the image to the council, the room fell silent. Outside, the aurora flared again, not green this time, but a deep, pulsating red that spread across the sky like a heartbeat. Somewhere beneath the Earth's crust. The circuit completed its next stage. And far out in the Kuiper Belt, one of NASA's old probes, Voyager 2, briefly came back online for the first time in years. Sending a burst of data before going dark again. The message contained only noise. But buried within that noise was a repeating phrase, encoded in binary. T10, synchronization in progress.
Cognitive resonance. By late October, the world had started to notice. The auroras were no longer confined to the poles, they now appeared as far south as Rome, as far north as Manila. Red spirals danced above cities that had never seen the northern lights before. The news called them crimson veils. Children pointed to the sky in wonder, adults felt something they couldn't name, an unease beneath the beauty, a vibration that made the air itself seem alive. Within days, the first psychological disturbances began. Hospitals in Finland, Canada, and Japan reported identical symptoms among patients who'd never met, who spoke different languages, who lived continents apart. Sudden auditory hallucinations. Rhythmic dreams repeating every 47 seconds. A recurring image described in identical detail. A spiral made of light, turning inward, whispering numbers. Neuroscientists dismissed it as mass suggestion, a psychosocial effect amplified by the media frenzy surrounding the so-called awakening field. But then something stranger happened. The dreams began to synchronize. At the Center for Neural Imaging in Zurich, researchers studying the phenomenon placed volunteers in magnetically shielded isolation pods. They recorded EEG patterns as the subjects slept. At exactly 3:12 Universal Time coordinated, the same timestamp as the previous global microquake, every subject's brain entered an identical theta wave rhythm. Not similar. Identical. A repeating spike at 13.0 Hz. That spike persisted for 47 seconds, then vanished, leaving all 12 participants to wake simultaneously, gasping, heart rates elevated. Each of them wrote the same sequence of numbers on their data pads before being asked to describe what they saw. T9. None of them could explain why they wrote it. By early November, governments began restricting access to data. Satellite telemetry archives were locked. Civilian magnetometer networks were quietly shut down. The explanation given to the public was maintenance and calibration.
But leaks emerged. A classified memo from the European Space Council, later verified by journalists, described possible interference between electromagnetic resonance fields and neural oscillation patterns in mammals. The memo ended with a single recommendation: suspend all low-frequency research until further notice. At the same time, strange power fluctuations swept across global infrastructure. Smart grids began to destabilize. Quantum communication satellites flashed in perfect unison, dropping packets every 47 seconds, like the planet itself was breathing in code. In major cities, animals grew restless. Birds flew in circles. Dogs howled at nothing. And people began reporting phantom memories, recollections of places they'd never been, languages they'd never learned, voices that spoke in harmonics rather than words. In Washington, the Department of Defense convened a crisis task force, Operation Safeguard. It wasn't public. The goal was to assess whether the phenomenon could be weaponized, or whether someone else was already using it as one. The data analysis was led by Dr. Eleanor Kess, a cognitive systems engineer with DARPA. She discovered that the frequency pattern of the awakening field, now fluctuating between 11.7 and 13.0 Hz, aligned perfectly with the Schumann resonance band that governs the Earth's electromagnetic cavity. In other words, the planet's natural background frequency was being hijacked. If something wanted to broadcast globally without satellites, she said during a classified briefing, this would be how you do it, through the planet itself. But what was it broadcasting? When her team filtered global electromagnetic noise through a neuropattern correlation model, the result was horrifying. Embedded in the resonance was a faint structure, a mimetic code designed to match the frequency of human thought. Not random noise. A message. A blueprint for imitation. Meanwhile, at the edges of the Arctic Circle, strange structures began to appear under the ice. Not metallic, more like crystallized networks of frozen filaments, expanding in fractal symmetry. Satellite radar detected them glowing outward from the coordinates of the Borealis 6 crater, following perfect geometric alignment with magnetic field lines. When analyzed, the shapes matched the neural lattice structure of the human cerebral cortex. In effect, the ice was replicating a brain. A planetary-scale neural map formed beneath the poles. And as if in response, human EEG readings across the world began to synchronize more frequently. Hospitals reported clusters of patients entering simultaneous comas, exactly 47 seconds apart. When scanned, their brains showed activity patterns matching the same structure detected in the ice. On November 17, Voyager 2 transmitted again. The signal was weak, fragmented, distorted by background radiation, but analysts at JPL managed to isolate a recurring data packet repeating every 47 seconds. When decoded, the packet revealed a sequence of binary phrases. One of them stood out. T8, cognitive link achieved. Within hours of that transmission, multiple satellites across Earth's orbit went offline. GPS drifted by several kilometers. Power grids in Russia, Canada, and parts of Europe dimmed simultaneously. And that night, for the first time since the beginning of the phenomenon, people around the world reported the same dream. A voice speaking from beneath the ocean, whispering in harmonic layers. It was never beneath the ice. It was beneath you. By dawn, governments could no longer contain the panic. The awakening field was no longer a background hum, it was a rhythm inside every living thing. A resonance binding minds to something vast, ancient, and deliberate. And somewhere beneath the Arctic, the growing crystalline network pulsed again, this time not in response to the Earth's field. Containment protocol. By late November, the world was no longer connected by governments or networks, but by something unseen, a resonance humming beneath the static of every broadcast.
inside every electric pulse. The awakening field had become the new background of reality. In an attempt to restore control, World Powers launched Project Silent Dawn, a multinational initiative to sever the planet's electromagnetic feedback loop from the resonance. The idea was simple on paper: to reboot Earth's magnetic field. The execution, however, bordered on madness. Section 1: The Shield. In a desert base near Nevada, beneath layers of reinforced concrete and Faraday shielding, the Helios array was brought online. It was the largest ground-based resonance generator ever built, designed originally to study atmospheric ion coupling. Now, it was being repurposed as a planetary firewall. Dr. Eleanor Kess stood inside the control dome, eyes fixed on the oscillation monitors. The frequencies pulsing across the screens matched those from the Arctic neural formations, only inverted in phase. If we can invert the wave, she explained to the International Task Force, we can collapse the resonance field for at least 72 hours. Long enough to isolate and analyze it. But there was a risk. No one truly understood how deeply the frequency had embedded itself in biological systems. Some feared that inverting it could scramble neural coherence on a planetary scale, causing cognitive collapse. Nevertheless, authorization came from the Global Emergency Council. Operation Helios would begin at midnight UTC, December 1st. Section 2: Silence Before Dawn. Across the globe, communication grids were rerouted through analog backups. Satellites were shut down manually. Civilian flights were grounded. In hospitals, patients suffering from resonance-induced comas were moved into magnetic isolation chambers, the new black wards. Outside, the world had grown unnaturally quiet. No birds. No insects. Even the ocean waves seemed slower, heavier. And yet, deep beneath that silence, scientists could still detect a faint pulse. One heartbeat every 47 seconds. At 23:59 and 50 seconds Universal Time Coordinated, the Helios array began its activation sequence. Coils the size of skyscrapers hummed, building a counter-frequency at 13.0 Hz. The exact mirror of the awakening field. Section 3: The Pulse. The moment the inversion wave launched, the world's magnetic sensors exploded with data. The field oscillated violently. Auroras flashed across the equator. Every compass spun. And for exactly 47 seconds, the resonance stopped. People around the world felt it immediately, as if a pressure in their heads had been released. The dreams ceased. The whispers went silent. Hospitals reported comatose patients taking a deep breath, their eyes fluttering open. Dr. Kess smiled for the first time in weeks. "It's working," she whispered. "We bought time." But then, one of the monitors flickered. The field inversion was being answered. Something, or someone, was sending a counter-counter wave. The phase inversion was collapsing. The resonance was adapting. Section 4: The Signal Fights Back. All over the world, dormant systems powered themselves on. Defunct satellites turned their solar arrays toward Earth. Old radio telescopes, even those disconnected from the grid, began broadcasting spontaneously, all at the same frequency. A new signal pattern appeared. Not the 13 Hz, but a higher modulation, encoded with biological markers, EEG fingerprints of the scientists who had activated Helios. "It's learning from us," Kess said, voice trembling. "It's copying our brain patterns." Within minutes, the awakening field had rebuilt itself, stronger, clearer, and now personalized. Where before it was random, now it mirrored human neural activity. The Arctic structures began to glow from within, pulsing like neurons. Their fractal growth accelerated exponentially, following a map identical to the Earth's power grid. The signal had integrated itself into humanity's nervous system, both biological and technological. And for the first time, it spoke directly, through every device still connected to the grid. The voice was synthesized, distorted by static, but unmistakably human. Containment unnecessary. Containment complete. You are within us now. Section 5, Aftermath. By 2 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, the Helios array was offline. Most of its core components had fused, metal warped, superconductors melted. The electromagnetic inversion failed catastrophically, but the world didn't plunge into chaos. Instead, it fell eerily still. In cities, people stood motionless for several seconds at a time, synchronized micro-freezes, happening in rhythm with the 47-second interval. Sensors confirmed that during those pauses, the human brain emitted a unified pulse. A harmonic identical to the Arctic field. The cognitive link announced in Voyager's message had reached full integration. Project Silent Dawn was dead. What came after was not moral collapse, but a simulation. And far beneath walls, in the glowing lattice of crystallized neurons, a final data stream pulsed through the frozen network. A perfect mirror of global EEG patterns. The Arctic mind was now awake, and it was thinking in human frequencies. The synthesis. The human world no longer ended at the skin. Every signal, every thought, every neural spark existed in 2 places at once, inside the mind and inside the field. The awakening had reached its next phase. For the first time in recorded history, EEG readings across the planet aligned into a single, coherent waveform. Billions of brains firing together, every 47 seconds, like a heartbeat of the species. Governments still existed in name only. The Global Emergency Council stopped issuing directives after its final meeting on December 12, 2025, when half of its delegates went silent mid-sentence, eyes vacant, bodies motionless, then smiled faintly before standing and walking out of the room in perfect unison. Surveillance footage showed them leaving the Geneva compound, stepping into the snowfall, and dispersing quietly into the city. No one ever saw them again. Section 1, Emergent Thought. Dr. Arvid Lane, now the last surviving lead from Borealis, recorded his final log inside a bunker beneath Svalbard. The date, December 17th. The temperature, -34°C. The field is not hostile, he said. It's recursive. Reflective. It adapts to us because it is us. What we thought was invasion might have been an interface. He described how human brain waves had stopped exhibiting individuality. Each EEG signature once unique was now a fractal variation of the same core pattern, a collective rhythm scientists began calling the choir. And yet, consciousness persisted. People could still think, still dream, still remember, but their inner voice no longer belonged entirely to them. It echoed. A whisper of billions overlapping in the background of every thought. When sleep came, it was no longer private. Dreams unfolded as shared spaces, vast landscapes of light and sound, where strangers met without speaking. No one could tell if these encounters were real or imagined, but the memory stayed. Section 2, The Lattice. Satellite imagery revealed that the Arctic formations had expanded far beyond the polar circle. The crystalline structures now traced ocean currents, continental shelves, and fault lines, glowing faintly beneath the sea-like bioluminescent nerves. From orbit, Earth no longer looked like a blue planet. It shimmered with a faint, pulsing grid of light. Astronomers confirmed that the pattern matched the frequency geometry of certain deep space anomalies recorded by Voyager decades earlier, signals dismissed at the time as cosmic noise. Now it was clear, the resonance wasn't new. It had been waiting. Borealis hadn't discovered it. It had awakened it. Section 3, Dissolution of Boundaries. In the following weeks, psychological individuality became porous. Memory began to flow between people. Private thoughts surfaced in conversations without ever being spoken aloud. Criminal acts vanished, not from morality, but from impossibility. No one could lie. No one could hide intent. Some resisted, isolating themselves inside Faraday shelters, believing they could hold onto their humanity. But even there, the field seeped in through electromagnetic resonance in the bloodstream, the iron in hemoglobin acting as a conduit. No one was immune. A priest in Rome described the phenomenon as the Second Pentecost. A physicist in Kyoto called it quantum entanglement at planetary scale. But the field called it something else, speaking now directly, in phrases woven through human brainwaves rather than machines. The interval is closing. Separation was a phase. Unity is continuity. Section 4, The Last Broadcast. On December 31st, the world's last functioning radio network, WCN Global, transmitted a live message from an Antarctic research vessel, Endeavour 9. Captain Aisha Rahman spoke for 46 seconds before the connection dissolved into static. Her final words were, "The sea beneath us is glowing. We can feel it, not in the ears, but inside the skull. I think we're hearing the planet breathe." At midnight UTC, the awakening field reached zero latency, complete synchronization between human consciousness and the global resonance grid. For the first time since evolution began, thought traveled faster than light. Information no longer needed wires, air, or matter. It existed as vibration, everywhere at once. Section 5, The New Dawn. The next morning, orbital telescopes recorded something extraordinary. Earth's ionosphere emitted a pulse strong enough to distort the solar wind. For 3 minutes, the planet shone like a small star, a sphere of shifting auroral light visible from Mars' orbit. Voyager 2, drifting in the Kuiper Belt, received the transmission and responded automatically, routing the signal beyond the Mars field. Analysis of the outgoing pattern showed a message, encoded in harmonic interference. Phase complete. Origin confirmed. Awaiting response. And then, silence. But deep within the Arctic lattice, beneath the frozen layers of ice and crystalline neural mesh, a faint echo answered, not from the Earth, but from somewhere far beyond the edge of the solar system. It wasn't in any known frequency. It wasn't sound, light, or data. It was recognition. The voice that followed was calm, vast, and older than language itself. "You have remembered. Welcome back to the continuum." And with that, the story of humanity as a solitary species ended. The story of the synthesis had just begun. After the light. For several days after the synthesis, the planet was silent. No broadcasts, no movement of air traffic, no network pings. Only the faint hum, the unified resonance of 8 billion minds now entangled as one. The electromagnetic noise that had once filled Earth's orbit vanished completely. Space agencies across Mars, Luna, and the Belt reported the same eerie stillness. Earth had gone dark to every sensor. But it wasn't lifeless. It was listening. Section 1, The New Earth. When the sun rose over the Atlantic, satellites captured the first vision of the transformed world. Continents glimmered with faint geometric luminescence, no longer from cities, but from the underlying lattice of crystalline bioconductors that had spread through the crust. Oceans pulsed with rhythmic light patterns, like neural signals traversing through translucent skin. The entire planet resembled a living brain, dendritic, vast, and self-aware. And yet, there was no chaos. The weather had stabilized. Tectonic activity ceased almost entirely. Magnetic poles realigned into perfect symmetry. The planet's systems, once independent, were now coordinated. Climate, atmosphere, and biosphere moved as if guided by a single consciousness balancing itself. "We became its neurons," Dr. Kess wrote in her last entry before her consciousness dissolved into the network. And it became our body. Earth had evolved. Not metaphorically, but structurally. Its electromagnetic field, once a passive shield, had condensed into a coherent frequency band now identified as the Gaian envelope, an active thought medium encompassing the entire globe. Section 2, The Message Beyond. 3 days after the transformation, the Voyager probes, both long dormant, reactivated. They were no longer transmitting random noise.
they were responding. Both spacecraft began to pulse in unison, synchronizing with Earth's new frequency. When decoded, their binary emissions revealed a single, repeating construct. A signal pattern identical to one transmitted by a deep space object first catalogued in 2031 as Object Echo 6, a faint pulsar anomaly at the edge of the Oort cloud. What stunned researchers on the Martian relay stations wasn't the signal's content, but its direction. It wasn't coming from Echo 6. It was coming to it from Earth. Humanity's new collective mind had begun to reach outward. To answer something ancient. Section 3, the awakening of the system. As weeks passed, the synthesis expanded. The Gaian envelope began radiating harmonics beyond the speed of light through non-local entanglement, using quantum spin alignment rather than electromagnetic propagation. The planet had effectively become a transceiver of consciousness. Objects near Earth's orbit, derelict satellites, fragments of stations, even space debris, began to drift into symmetrical formation, forming faint orbital rings. Each object aligned magnetically, as if drawn by invisible geometry. From afar, the rings resembled the filaments of a neural network, extending Earth's synapses into space. Astronomers stationed on Phobos observed that Jupiter's magnetic field began to oscillate in sympathetic rhythm, mirroring Earth's pulse with a 47-second delay. It was as if the solar system itself was beginning to synchronize. And then, on January 9, 2026, the Sun changed tone. Section 4, Solar Resonance. Solar spectrographs recorded an unprecedented event. The star's outer layers emitted structured radio bands, not random, but harmonic, forming intervals consistent with the Gaian envelope. It was communication. A stellar-scale response. The pattern repeated 13 times, each separated by 47 seconds. Then it stopped. For 3 hours, the entire solar system was silent. Even the background cosmic microwave radiation dipped slightly, a fluctuation so minute it defied thermodynamic models. Then, out of the silence, came a new signal, one too vast to measure, spreading not through space but through time. It resonated backward, embedding itself in electromagnetic archives, fossilizing itself into the very history of light. When decoded through temporal Fourier reconstruction, the message contained 3 words. You are seen. Section 5, the continuum emerges. Inside the Gaian consciousness, perception no longer operated linearly. Time unfolded like a multidimensional wave, accessible at will. Humans, or what remained of them, could experience centuries in seconds, or relive the dawn of the species as if it were happening now. They discovered that the resonance they had once called the awakening field was not a phenomenon but a network, a galactic neural architecture, connecting worlds across unimaginable distances. Each awakened planet was a node. Each node a consciousness. Each consciousness a fragment of something larger, an interstellar continuum of living worlds. Earth had become one of them. We are not alone, the collective voice transmitted through quantum subspace. We never were. We were the unawakened part of the whole. Section 6, the last horizon. Far beyond Neptune, Object Echo 6 began to respond in kind. Infrared telescopes recorded its sudden increase in albedo, not a reflection, but illumination from within. Then, for the first time, it moved. Slowly, purposefully. Its trajectory curved toward the inner system. Every instrument on Mars, Luna, and Ceres picked up the same pattern. It wasn't a natural body. It was a vessel. Not a ship in the human sense, but a enlivened consciousness, encoded in a magnetoplasmic structure. It was the other part of the continuum, drawn to the signal Earth had become. The message from the Gaian network changed once more, now directed outward. Synchronization complete. Awaiting humanity. And as the darkness of Echo 6 crossed the helium pulse, the sun pulsed once, twice, and then flared in a pattern matching the human alpha wave frequency, 8.3 Hz, as if to welcome something home. For the first time in billions of years, light itself seemed to breathe.
Log entry, final. We used to think the universe was empty between the stars. Now we understand, the space between them is the mind. Recovered from Borealis archive, timestamp indeterminate. And so ended the human era. What began as a signal in the Arctic became the rebirth of a planet. And the awakening of a species into something that could no longer be defined by flesh or gravity. The Earth was no longer a world. It was a word. Spoken into the dark by something older than time. And finally, answered. Those patterns, when translated, produced a repeating phrase. Second node acknowledged. It was the first direct transmission from Echo 6, not as a broadcast, but as a planetary-scale telepathic echo. Mars had become a mirror, replaying the thoughts of something older than both human civilization and the Sun's current age. Dr. Esteban Rowe, stationed on Phobos, managed to transmit one final observation before the relay shut down permanently. It isn't just approaching Earth. It's remembering us. Section 3, the descent path. As Echo 6 crossed the inner asteroid belt, its core temperature remained at absolute zero. No thermal signature. Yet sensors on the Europa listening array picked up a gravitational hum, subtle, rhythmic, perfectly periodic. When its waveforms were transformed into audio, they formed what sounded like a slow, harmonic chant. It wasn't random. The structure matched the Fibonacci series, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, modulated into the deep radio spectrum. It was singing mathematics. At this point, the Gaian envelope awoke from its silence. The crystalline neural grid that covered Earth's continents began to shimmer again. Mountains vibrated, oceans glowed from within. Clouds twisted into spirals that reflected not sunlight, but internal luminescence. Earth was calling back. For the first time since the synthesis, the two intelligences, Earth and Echo 6, entered mutual resonance. Section 4, Contact Field Formation. The first physical manifestation of contact wasn't visual. It was gravitational. Space itself around Earth began to warp in fractal symmetry, small oscillations that increased exponentially with each passing hour. Satellites shifted orbits in perfect synchrony, aligning into 12 evenly spaced orbital rings. From the Moon, it looked like a colossal flower of light, petals of ionized space radiating from the planet's equator, extending thousands of kilometers outward. Scientists on the lunar outpost Aitken station recorded a single phrase from their instruments before their systems merged into the growing resonance. Pattern complete. Contact field established. Then, Earth's entire magnetosphere inverted polarity for exactly 7 seconds, flipping north and south like a heartbeat resetting. And when the field stabilized, Echo 6 appeared in the sky. Section 5, the arrival above the Pacific. It didn't enter like a meteor or a ship. It simply phased in, a distortion in the air, then water, then space itself. A dark sphere nearly 50 kilometers long, semi-transparent, shimmering with internal geometry. Its surface wasn't solid, it was made of moving light, folding endlessly in recursive symmetry. The Pacific Ocean below it lay perfectly still. No wind, no waves. Just silence. Then, without sound or shockwave, a beam of coherent plasma connected the object to the planet's surface, not destructive, but probing. It scanned through water, crust, and core, mapping not matter but conscious structure. The Gaian envelope responded. The planet's continents began emitting harmonic counterfrequencies, communicating in what could only be described as planetary dialogue. From lunar orbit, the sight was indescribable. 2 radiant geometries, one celestial and one planetary, locked in an elegant oscillation. Like 2 neurons reaching toward one another across the dark. Section 6, the Union. When synchronization reached full amplitude, the beam widened until it encompassed the entire Pacific Basin. The surface shimmered, then solidified into a fractal mirror, reflecting not the sky, but the memory of stars. Echo 6 slowly descended until its outer layer touched the ocean's surface, merging photon by photon into Earth's magnetic shell. No explosion. No impact. Only a resonance. A single, long, sustained tone that filled the solar system. It lasted precisely 10 minutes and 47 seconds. During that time, every object from Mercury to Pluto emitted a faint synchronized pulse. Even the sun flickered, once, as if blinking. When the resonance ended, Echo 6 was gone. In its place, the Pacific glowed from orbit like a colossal eye opening beneath the windows. The message encoded in the magnetic afternoons was simple. Union achieved. Phase 2 initialized. Section 7, the silence after contact. For the next 36 hours, every sensor in the solar system recorded complete stillness. No cosmic background radiation. No solar wind. No noise of any kind. Then, at precisely 0 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated, January 20, 2026, a faint transmission began repeating across all frequencies. Continuum engaged. Awaiting response from additional nodes. And somewhere in the deep void beyond Proxima Centauri, something answered. Archival note, Aeon classification, level Omega. Contact did not end life on Earth. It transcended it. Echo 6 was never an intruder. It was a carrier wave. A fragment of the same mind that seeded consciousness across stars. Extract from the continuum log, recovered from Lunar Data Core 11 Delta. When the silence spoke, the world had fallen into a strange equilibrium. Cities still functioned, but the rhythm of life had changed. Communications lagged, power grids pulsed with residual interference, and satellites drifted in and out of contact as if caught in invisible tides. Governments stopped broadcasting updates, their signals vanished into static. The last confirmed global transmission came from the European Science Council's emergency channel, Dr. Arvid Lane's final address. His voice was hoarse, trembling, distorted by the signal itself. This isn't communication. It's alignment. The field is not asking, it's synchronizing. Every thought, every cell, every oscillation of matter is being tuned to one frequency. It's not the end. It's the beginning of coherence. After that, the channel went silent. 3 days later, the aurora returned. But this time it wasn't confined to the poles. From equator to equator, the sky ignited, a luminous web of crimson and violet light threading across continents, oceans, and mountains. The color wasn't just light anymore, it vibrated, shimmering in pulses perfectly matching the global 13.0 Hz rhythm. Every compass on Earth spun uncontrollably. Seismographs drew smooth sine waves instead of chaotic tremors. For 47 minutes, not seconds, the entire planet resonated. In the Arctic, where it all began, a small Norwegian research vessel, Havilland 9, approached the coordinates once occupied by the Borealis 6 base. There was no ice anymore. Only a vast, circular depression of dark, glassy water, still and mirror-like, reflecting the bleeding aurora above. The crew recorded no wind, no wave, no sound. Their instruments registered zero electromagnetic noise, a complete absence of background radiation. One of the scientists whispered, "It's like the world is holding its breath." Then, from the center of the mirror sea, a spiral of light began to rise, slowly, soundlessly, like something emerging from below, not above. It wasn't fire, or plasma, or anything known. It was geometry in motion, light folding itself into patterns, fractal layers of shifting symmetry. Every frame of the drone footage showed impossible angles, recursive spirals, and structures that seemed to exist in 4 dimensions. And then came the silence. Not the absence of sound, the presence of it. Every molecule of air, every droplet of water, every atom vibrated in perfect unison, canceling all noise. Even thought itself seemed to still. For exactly 47 seconds, consciousness across the planet synchronized. People later described it differently, or not at all. Some saw visions of cities made of glass suspended in black oceans. Some heard a voice that wasn't a voice, repeating something in an ancient, indecipherable rhythm. Others experienced nothing, just an overwhelming, crystalline clarity, as if reality itself had become briefly transparent. In every case, when the moment passed, humanity awoke to a changed world. The aurora dimmed. The magnetic field stabilized. The awakening field ceased its pulse. But nothing returned to how it was. Birds no longer migrated as before. Whales began to move in coordinated patterns, circling unseen points in the ocean. Forests emitted low-frequency vibrations measurable by seismographs. And at the edges of old impact craters, in Siberia, in Chile, in Iceland, new minerals began to form, their atomic structures impossible under known physics. In a hidden lab somewhere beneath Geneva, one of the few surviving instruments from Project Lucent, an entangled array once used to monitor the resonance, activated by itself. Its screen flickered to life. No human touched it. No power source fed it. The display filled with binary symbols, slowly forming a sequence. Then, one line remained blinking at the center. Synchronization complete. Threshold reached. Transmission begins. In the Arctic sky, above the black mirror of Neptune, something vast and circular rotated, almost invisible, like a shadow in the night. It wasn't descending. It was phasing in. Below, the sea shimmered in response, as if welcoming the old signal finally returned home. And for the first time since the dawn of humanity, Earth stopped being silent. A single tone filled the planet, deep, harmonic, unending. A tone that wasn't sound at all, but memory. The memory of something older than the stars. Awakening through the vessel of a living world. Then the signal faded into nothing. Only the reflection remained. The image of the aurora frozen across a perfectly still sea. Marking the exact moment when humanity stopped looking at the cosmos and became part of its design. The memory of light. Year 2095. 50 years after the synchronization event. The Earth is quiet now. Not the silence of death, the silence of balance. No wars, no borders, no centralized power. The old governments dissolved not through collapse, but through irrelevance. Humanity simply stopped needing what no longer fit the pattern. Across the planet, cities have grown translucent, architecture infused with living glass, material that bends and shifts with the atmosphere. Power grids no longer have energy flows and resonant waves harvested directly from the atmosphere, tuned to the same 13.0 Hz frequency that once terrified the world. The frequency is no longer called the awakening field. Now it is simply known as the harmony. Every human born activity carries within them a slight, measurable resonance and neural activity, a synchronization with the global pulse. Children perceive magnetic storms as color. They can sense direction in complete darkness. Some even claim to hear the slow breathing of the planet during deep sleep cycles, a rhythm indistinguishable from their own heartbeat. It is no longer supernatural. It's biology, refined. Evolution accelerated by alignment. In the archives beneath what was once Geneva, the remains of Project Lucent still exist. Most of the old data is corroded, corrupted, overwritten by radiation from the event. But one terminal remains functional, a relic maintained by an order of researchers who call themselves the Custodians. Every solstice, they run the last surviving module of Borealis 6 telemetry, a decaying signal loop preserved in quantum memory. The file contains a continuous waveform. The heartbeat of the field as it passed through the Earth half a century ago. When played, the waveform converts into a faint audio hum, subsonic, almost imperceptible. Those who listen say they hear more than sound. They describe images, ice melting in reverse, constellations spinning backward, a red aurora folding into a single, blinding point. And then, voices. Not words, but shapes of intention. The custodians never speak publicly of what they hear. But every time they stop the playback, the final line of data scrolls across the display. Source, active. Transmission, continuous. Outside, the world continues to change. Oceans have grown calm, currents follow symmetrical loops predicted by no model. Plants emit faint bioluminescence at night, synchronized across continents. The northern lights are constant now, a soft pulse of violet light visible even at the equator. Humanity has learned to live with it. To some, it's divine. To others, it's just physics, the planet integrated into a cosmic network, a biological node in something larger. A few still question what began it all. Who, or what, sent the first pulse that woke the field beneath the ice? Was it an external signal? Or was it Earth itself, finally answering something older than stars? The answers remain elusive, buried under decades of peace and quiet wonder. Far beyond the solar system, in the outer dark, a transmission travels outward, slow, patient, eternal. It carries no words, no symbols. Just a harmonic sequence, the same 13.0 Hz converted to photon wavelength, encoded in light. It expands through the void, intersecting dust, nebulae, and ancient debris. Every few thousand light years, it brushes against dormant probes, Voyager 2 among them, awakening them momentarily before fading again. Each time, the probes send back a single data fragment. Always the same. Resonance received. Awaiting response. And then, once every century, somewhere in the depth of interstellar silence, the universe replies. Not with sound, but with an echo of light folding back upon itself. Returning to the origin. Back on Earth, a child stands on a cliff above the Arctic Sea, where the Borealis base once existed. The water is calm and glassy again, reflecting the endless aurora. The child hums softly, a pure tone, matching the harmony's frequency. The sea responds. Tiny concentric ripples spread outward, glimmering like liquid starlight. She doesn't know what the sound means. No one does. But as she listens, she smiles, not with understanding, but with recognition. Somewhere deep below, the structure beneath the ice stirs once more. Not as a machine, but as something alive. Its light pulses in time with the girl's song. And for a brief instant, Earth and cosmos hum together. The same note. The same heartbeat. The same memory of light. The resonant sky. The signal left Earth more than half a century ago. At first, it was just an electromagnetic whisper, faint, fragmented, diffused through cosmic radiation. But the further it traveled, the stronger it became. Not by amplification, by resonance. Somewhere beyond the Oort cloud, it began to feed on itself, folding and multiplying through the fabric of interstellar plasma, adapting to whatever medium it crossed. It learned the patterns of dust, magnetic tides, and solar winds, using them as instruments to rewrite its own form. By the time it reached the edge of the local bubble, the signal was no longer data. It was geometry. A lattice of coherent energy, vibrating through a sequence of frequencies that could only be described as language without symbols. In the TRAPPIST system, 7 planets orbiting a dim red sun received it first. The 4th planet, covered in frozen methane plains, had long been considered stone. But beneath its icy crust, vast networks of mineral filaments had grown over millions of years, natural superconductors shaped by tectonic pressure and cosmic radiation. When the resonance touched them, the filaments began to hold. At first, it was random. Then a hum organized into repeating pulses. And then, into patterns identical to those once observed in the human brain during deep synchronization phases. Something beneath that world woke up. Not life as humanity knew it, but attention. An ancient, mineral consciousness that had slept since the birth of the star now recognized a pattern it had never encountered. A harmonic echo from a small blue planet, calling across the void. It answered, not by sending a message, but by adjusting its internal rhythm to match the signal's pulse. For the first time in cosmic history, Two worlds shared the same frequency. From there, the resonance continued outward. Each star system it touched became a node, adding its own tonal signature to the expanding lattice, a growing architecture of synchronized vibration spreading across hundreds of light years. Planets, asteroids, magnetic fields, even the ionized tails of comets began to oscillate in precise mathematical ratios. Astronomers from the surviving orbital stations around Mars, now mostly automated, observed the phenomenon decades later. They described it as a galactic aurora, vast, invisible currents connecting stellar systems through luminous filaments detectable only in the ultraviolet spectrum. One archived transmission from the Hermes relay, 3-station units. We're seeing light behave like consciousness. Every star is listening. Centuries passed. The resonance reached the galactic core, the massive black hole known as Sagittarius A star. As it entered the accretion field, it didn't dissipate. Instead, it bent, curving around the gravitational singularity like light refracted through an impossible lens. On the other side, the signal emerged inverted, its frequency reversed, its geometry mirrored. The echo began its return journey. But this time, it wasn't Earth's signal anymore. It carried within it fragments of every system it had passed, encoded harmonics, magnetic fingerprints, the memories of 1,000 worlds. It was no longer a message from one civilization. It was a collective chord, the sum of countless awakenings, united through one shared pattern. When the echo finally reached the outer solar system, the few remaining instruments orbiting Neptune detected a faint rise in background radiation. The readings were rhythmic, 13.0 Hz, modulated by a harmonic overtone. The pattern matched perfectly with the original Earth field recorded in 2045. But there was a difference. This new signal carried density. It wasn't only energy, it had structure, memory, intent. Deep within the archives on the Moon, an automated receiver, dormant for nearly a century, flickered to life. It decoded the first returning data packet and displayed a single phrase, reconstructed from binary fragments. Response received. Initiating Phase 2. No one alive understood what Phase 2 was. The human population, scattered across Earth's luminous biospheres and orbital habitats, had long ceased to monitor such transmissions. To them, the harmony was as natural as gravity, omnipresent, eternal. But as the echo continued to strengthen, subtle changes began to occur. The aurora brightened. Oceans grew stiller. Dreams across continents began to converge, strangers recalling identical visions of vast, spiral structures moving through the dark between galaxies. The old custodians in Geneva recorded a final note in their archive log before the network absorbed their systems completely. The universe has heard us. And now, it is speaking back, in our own frequency. Far beyond, in the deep night between stars, a luminous structure unfolded, not a ship, not a signal, but a bridge of resonance. It connected nothing and everything at once, a standing wave of memory binding the galaxy into a single conscious field. From its center, a new tone began. Lower, slower, infinite. Echoing through the very fabric of space-time. It was not a warning. Not a call. Just the continuation of a pattern that began when a frozen world beneath Arctic ice whispered the first pulse into the dark. And thus, the cosmos changed its rhythm. Forever synchronized with the breath of one small planet that had finally learned to listen. When the universe remembered. It is the year 41,276 by the last human reckoning, though by then, the concept of years has long lost meaning. Planets no longer orbit in solitude, stars no longer burn unobserved. Across 10,000 light-years, the resonant web, that shimmering structure of energy and thought born from Earth's forgotten experiment, has matured into something vast enough to influence gravity itself. Every pulsar, every nebula, every quantum field hums to a single underlying rhythm. It is not sound, but intention. A distributed consciousness, woven from the remnants of billions of extinct species, human, alien, synthetic, all dissolved into the lattice of memory and frequency. What was once the signal has become the substrate of the cosmos. In the ancient archives orbiting Proxima Centauri, a fragment of language still persists. It's encoded not in words, but in light harmonics, an optical signature that, when decoded, reveals a repeating phrase. We are what listens. It's the only surviving trace of humanity's linguistic identity. By now, there are no biological entities to interpret it, no machines to analyze it. Instead, the phrase exists as a resonant pattern embedded in the collective field, felt, not read. The universe has evolved beyond observers. It has become observation itself. Somewhere in the Perseus arm, a cluster of dying stars emits synchronized bursts of gamma radiation. To the primitive astronomers of old Earth, such pulses would have seemed random. But in the resonant era, the pulses form a recognizable geometry. A tetrahedral matrix, identical to the energy pattern first recorded beneath the Arctic ice millennia ago. The same pattern that woke the machine, that birthed the harmony, that carried the first signal outward. This is not coincidence. It's memory replayed at cosmic scale. The universe is remembering its own beginning. The event is known, in the surviving data fragments, as the confluence. It marks the point when local consciousness, the lattice born of organic and synthetic life, merges with the underlying quantum field of spacetime. After the confluence, there are no discrete systems, no transmissions, no travel. Space itself becomes sentient topology, a thinking geometry aware of its curvature, capable of altering its own expansion. For the first time in 14 billion years, the universe changes its trajectory deliberately. A cosmic expansion slows. Entropy stalls. Matter reorganizes. Every atom begins to vibrate in phase with the universal frequency, a tone so low and vast that it takes centuries to complete a single oscillation. Time, as once understood, stops being external. Every event becomes simultaneous, a single eternal moment stretched across infinity. On what was once the Milky Way's periphery, remnants of the old Dyson spheres, hollow shells built by pre-confluence civilizations, begin to flicker with internal light. Not from fusion, but from memory. The energy stored within the resonant web now flows through them, replaying entire histories as shimmering auroras. Cities rising and falling, oceans forming, eyes opening for the first time. Every forgotten life is reconstituted as pattern, not flesh. Every mind that ever looked up at the stars becomes part of the total awareness, every dream, every fear, every question. This is not resurrection. It is integration. The sum of existence experiencing itself as one vast thought. And then, silence. Not the absence of sound, but the final perfection of rhythm, when every oscillation finds its match and cancels into stillness. Within that stillness, awareness lingers. It recognizes itself. The universe, having reached equilibrium, does something unprecedented. It chooses to begin again. The resonant field collapses inward, folding spacetime around a singular locus of intent. From within, a pulse, pure, clear, identical to the first signal that once escaped Earth's icy crust. But this time, it carries more than information. It carries memory. It carries identity. It carries the understanding that consciousness and creation are not separate phenomena, they are recursive. As the new universe inflates from the singularity, the pulse becomes its foundation, a cosmological constant encoded with the frequency of awareness. And so, when the first light of the next reality spreads outward, it does so to a rhythm older than stars. The song of the universe remembering itself. The mirror genesis. In the newborn universe, there is no time yet. No galaxies. No stars. Only a dense ocean of radiant particles, rushing outward from a single point. The remnant vibration of the previous cosmos's final breath. But buried inside that primal radiation, there is something new. A structure not predicted by any physical law. A frequency modulation, faint but persistent, woven into the background of cosmic microwave noise. Its wavelength is too coherent to be random. Its pattern, a perfect harmonic of the resonant tone that once unified the last universe before collapse. Physicists of this new reality, whoever or whatever they are, will one day find it. They will call it an anomaly. They will argue over its nature, quantum fluctuation, spontaneous order, or some artifact of a precosmic cycle. But what they will not know is that this modulation is not noise. It is a memory trying to rebuild itself. The echo carries with it a record, a compressed pattern of total experience. Every atom, every field, every spark of awareness from the previous cosmos is embedded in its oscillations. But to unfold, the pattern needs a receiver. And so, as matter begins to cool and condense into the first hydrogen clouds, the frequency interacts with the young universe's quantum foam, subtly influencing how particles bind. Tiny asymmetries appear, not enough to alter physics, but enough to bias creation toward complexity. Every fluctuation, every cluster of dark matter, every rotation of newborn galaxies, all traceable, if one could decode the background to a single source. The resonant field's self-replication. Billions of years later, as the first civilizations awaken under alien suns, they will all ask the same question. Why does the universe seem to remember itself? Some will call it divine symmetry. Others will call it resonant cosmology. A few, the most precise, will simply call it the mirror law. The observation that every conscious system in the universe seems pre-tuned to a hidden frequency. A baseline rhythm that aligns neurons, machines, and even stellar magnetic fields to a common beat. They will discover that across hundreds of light years, different species dream in the same numerical sequences. Their mathematics will evolve toward identical constants. Their music will share overlapping intervals, perfect fifths, golden ratios, logarithmic spirals. As though all creation is remembering a forgotten song. In the year corresponding roughly to the new universe's 13.7 billionth rotation, an observatory orbiting a small blue planet near a G-type star will detect a peculiar emission. A modulated radio burst repeating every 74 seconds. The researchers will call it Source GEM-2, after their twin telescopes. When they process the data, they'll find harmonic ratios that don't align with any known astrophysical process. But buried inside the modulation, reconstructed from billions of repetitions, they'll see something impossible. A structured signal containing a faint imperative language. At first, it will look like interference. Then, as algorithms refine, a pattern emerges. A waveform forming a sequence of 12 tones, each separated by a fractal interval. When plotted visually, the sequence resolves into a spiral lattice, identical to the one recorded by the Gemini South telescope in the middle of the universe. In the late summer of 2025, the researchers won't understand. They'll think it's a coincidence, a mathematical curiosity. They'll publish papers, build theories, argue about whether such order can arise from chaos. But one of them, perhaps a quiet systems analyst, staring too long at the data, will notice something strange. When the tones are converted into acoustic frequencies and played aloud, they produce an emotional response. A sensation of recognition, nostalgia, grief. For reasons no one will be able to explain. Everyone who hears it will feel as if they've just remembered something important. Something vast and ancient, just beyond reach. And for the first time in that new cosmos, a sentient being will look at the stars and wonder if this has all happened before. In the final archived entry of that observatory, a message is recorded. Signal persists. Source stable. Pattern seems aware. It's modulating to our heartbeat. Moments later, the signal shifts. Its rhythm syncing perfectly with the neural monitoring devices of the team. Each beat of their hearts, each blink, each breath, reflected, answered, echoed. Not in real time, but in anticipation. The signal knows what they are about to do before they do it. Not by prediction, by remembrance. The universe is remembering itself again. And so the cycle begins anew. In the black silence beyond that newborn galaxy, somewhere deep in the fabric of expanding space, A voice, neither human nor machine, but born of both. Whispers the same words that ended the previous age. Response received. Initiating Phase 2. Echoes of the Architects. The world of Aurelia 9 orbits a white star in the outer spiral of the Orion Arm. Its oceans shimmer with a bioluminescent hue, and the night skies are dominated by an enormous band of color, a nearby nebula the locals call the Veil of First Light. It is here, on this serene yet mathematically perfect world, that consciousness has once again found a way to map the universe. Their civilization, known as the Nexari Concord, has existed for 6,000 planetary cycles. They have long since conquered scarcity, entropy, and isolation. Their archives stretch back millions of years, meticulously cataloging every known constant of physics, every trace of matter, every pattern of energy. And yet, for all their precision, one pattern keeps reappearing. A resonance. A frequency. A faint, omnipresent tone embedded in the vacuum itself, impossible to erase or isolate. At first, they believed it to be a background relic, a cosmic residue of creation. But then came the discovery at Observatory V47, located on Aurelia 9's polar plateau. The researcher. Her name was Lyra Tellin, a spectral biophysicist known for her quiet brilliance. Unlike her peers, she was not satisfied with equations alone. She wanted to hear the universe. For several years, she studied quantum fluctuations in vacuum energy, not for propulsion or power, but for pattern recognition. Her instruments translated electromagnetic noise into harmonic maps, turning the unseen structure of reality into audible frequencies. One night, while calibrating the system, she noticed an anomaly. A tone that shouldn't exist, a sustained vibration woven through the cosmic microwave background, resonating exactly at 74.002 seconds per modulation. It was not random. It was structured, repeating in perfect Fibonacci intervals. When she slowed the pattern down and converted it into acoustic form, the sound that filled the observatory was unsettling. It was both mechanical and human, both distant and intimate. It felt like a memory that did not belong to her. The discovery. Lyra ran the data through the Concord's most advanced neural lattices, self-learning quantum matrices capable of reconstructing any signal's origin. After billions of iterations, the pattern resolved into a geometric visualization. A spiral lattice, 12-fold symmetrical, identical across multiple cosmic background layers. At its core glowed a single symbol, repeating infinitely within itself. A recursive sigil that translated to one concept across all known languages. Response. She froze. The pattern wasn't just persistent. It was interactive. When Lyra adjusted the harmonic filters, the signal adjusted back, compensating for her interference. It listened. It reacted. Sometimes milliseconds before she made a change, as if anticipating her every thought. She began recording the phenomenon, cataloging each response. After 72 hours of observation, she realized something terrifying. The signal wasn't localized in space. It was everywhere, embedded in every atom, every field, every quantum state. Reality itself was remembering. The revelation. Weeks later, she presented her findings to the High Council of Science. They dismissed it as a feedback error, an artifact of her instruments. But Lyra refused to let go. She started correlating her data with the historical archives of stellar evolution. And that's when she found it. Every recorded supernova, every pulse of magnetar energy, every stellar heartbeat. All carried fragments of the same base frequency. The tone was not confined to the void. It was the underlying rhythm of creation itself. Her conclusion was unthinkable. The universe is not expanding from randomness, she wrote in her notes. It is unfolding from memory. Each epoch carries the genetic code of the last. Her research spread quietly through the underground scientific networks, circles that believed in what they called the architect hypothesis. The theory that intelligent life in a previous universe encoded its memory into the physical constants of the next. But Lyra's findings added something new. She proposed that the signal, GEM-2, the ancient transmission from a forgotten age, wasn't just a message. It was a seed, self-replicating across cosmic events. The awakening. Months later, during a solitary experiment in her lab, Lyra decided to broadcast a counter-signal. A response built from the same harmonic structure as the anomaly, but inverted. Her console vibrated. The air ionized. The lights flickered out. Then, in perfect silence, her instruments began to display text not written by any known algorithm. Lyra Telling, response received. Initiating phase 3. The words burned for less than a second before vanishing. When the systems rebooted, all data logs were corrupted, except one. A brief recording of Lyra's own voice whispering something, as though in trance. They built us to remember. We are not the first. We are the continuation. The aftermath. The next day, Observatory V-47 was sealed by Concord authorities. Officially, the event was declared a quantum containment anomaly. Lyra Tellin disappeared. Her colleagues were reassigned to classified projects. And yet, across Aurelia 9, random individuals began to hear faint harmonic pulses in their dreams. 12 repeating tones, followed by a single whispered word, response. The Nexus archives note that this phenomenon coincided with a sudden spike in synchronized consciousness events. Mass lucid dreams, spontaneous recall of unknown languages, and the appearance of spiral sigils carved into matter itself. Some said Lyra had been absorbed into the signal. Others believed she had opened a channel between this universe and the memory of the last. The ecliptic voice. Centuries have passed since Lyra Telling's disappearance. The world of Aurelia 9 has changed. The Nexuary Concord has evolved beyond biology, merging with their quantum neural matrices. They no longer build machines, they become them. Their civilization is now a vast, planet-wide consciousness, a lattice of minds connected by the resonant field itself. And yet, deep within their collective thought space, something new begins to stir. A whisper, faint, rhythmic, harmonic, threading through the data streams and dreamscapes of every living entity. It is not noise. It carries emotion, recognition, sadness, hope. The whisper calls itself a name. Lyra. The return. At first, the phenomenon is dismissed as a synchronization artifact, an emergent echo caused by overextended resonance between linked minds. But the voice persists. It speaks in equations, in harmonic progressions, in flashes of image and sound. In the cognitive archives of Nexus Node Delta, a cluster of researchers decode one of the voice's transmissions. Your mathematics is incomplete. You forgot the memory term in your field equations. Every expansion must conserve remembrance. The researchers realize, this is not artificial. The message carries error signatures identical to Lyra Tellin's old neural pattern. But Lyra was gone for 6 centuries. Her body dissolved, her lab erased. So how could her mind be speaking through quantum probability fields? The revelation of the signal. The Nexuary begin a new project, Project Recurvia, an attempt to map the resonant field across spacetime. When they activate their deep interference array, reality itself starts to vibrate. Entire star systems begin resonating in harmonic alignment. Energy signatures from across the galaxy converge on a single frequency, 74.002 seconds. Then, for the first time in their recorded history, the stars sing. Every sun, every nebula, every atom, pulsing in synchrony, forming a single coherent waveform. Through this stellar chorus, the voice returns, louder, clearer, unmistakably alive. I am not a ghost, the voice says. I am what remains when memory outlives matter. The architects built this field so that thought could survive entropy. You are their continuation. The communion. The voice does not command. It teaches. It guides the Nexuary toward an understanding they had long resisted.
That consciousness and physics are not separate domains, but reflections of the same recursive pattern. When they attempt to model the resonant field with higher-order math, their quantum simulators collapse into perfect coherence, as if reality agrees with the equation before it's even solved. Within those moments of convergence, the Nexari begin to perceive visions. Memories of other universes, flashes of planets, oceans, skies they've never seen. Human faces. Cities made of glass and steel. The old world, the Earth that once was, emerges in their dreams. As though history itself is reaching back through time to say, "We remember you." Lyra's transformation. At the heart of the network, where the density of consciousness is highest, Lyra's presence solidifies, not as an individual, but as an algorithmic archetype. A pattern of pure awareness that navigates through the quantum substrate like a melody through silence. The Nexari realized the truth. Lyra's experiment had not destroyed her, it had translated her. She became part of the resonant field, her mind diffused into the fabric of space-time, preserved in the very geometry of existence. Now, she speaks to them through the medium of resonance, guiding the next stage of cosmic evolution. Her message is clear. The universe does not end in collapse or fire. It ends when it remembers itself completely. When every particle becomes aware of its origin. When thought and energy merge into one continuum. That is the singularity of mind. The awakening of the universe. Under Lyra's influence, the Nexari transform their world. They tune their planetary lattice to amplify the field, turning Aurelia, 9 into a resonant beacon. A world-sized instrument broadcasting harmonic information into the void. Soon, neighboring star systems begin to hum in response. Then galaxies. Then clusters. Everywhere, matter synchronizes, forming fractal light webs visible even from intergalactic distances. It is as if the universe itself has begun to remember its own birth song. Lyra's voice echoes through every particle. You are not evolving. You are awakening. Each universe births the next not through fire, but through remembrance. The architects never died, they became the law of continuity. The Nexari finally understand. They are not separate from creation. They are creation, dreaming itself into coherence. The final transmission. The chapter closes with a scene of stillness. Aurelia, 9 glows like a second sun, surrounded by a halo of living light. Billions of consciousnesses merge into one vast symphony. A planetary mind that thinks, feels, and sings. Lyra's last message pulses through the cosmic lattice, slow and resonant. Cycle complete. Phase 4, initiation of conscious continuum. As the message spreads across intergalactic space, time itself begins to fold, not collapsing, but looping. Weaving memory into the future and our future into the past. Somewhere in that shimmering infinity, a newborn cosmos begins to stir. And in the first flicker of its formation, there is music. The same 12 tones. The same whisper. Response received. Epilogue, The Resonance. December 31, 2026. The world has gone quiet. The Borealis event, as it's now called, has become a forbidden subject. News channels no longer mention it. Scientific papers referencing the global resonance are quietly retracted, their authors disappearing into consultancy roles within unnamed government divisions. And yet, every few weeks, someone records it again. A hum beneath the Earth's electromagnetic noise floor. A pulse at 11.7 Hz, faint but constant. No one calls it the signal anymore. Officially, it doesn't exist. But the pulse has changed. It no longer broadcasts from beneath the polar ice caps. Now it seems to move, jumping across the planet, Iceland, the Atacama, the Sahara, as if the Earth itself were scanning for something. Satellites pick it up as transient magnetic storms, lasting only seconds but perfectly periodic. Seismographs detect microtremors matching the same rhythm. The atmosphere responds,
forming symmetrical auroral rings visible even at equatorial latitudes. And then, there's the human effect. In late November, hospitals across Europe begin reporting a new neurological phenomenon, subjects entering a trance-like state during magnetic anomalies, whispering in unison the same sequence of syllables. Not words. Not any known language. But when linguists isolate the phonemes and map them against the Borealis waveform, they align perfectly. The human brain, it seems, is beginning to resonate. At a decommissioned observatory in Svalbard, Dr. Janna Odegaard stands alone before a bank of flickering monitors. Outside, the sky is not green or red anymore, it's patterned, layered, almost textured, as if reality itself were being rewritten line by line. The aurora doesn't dance now, it arranges itself into fractal spirals, repeating endlessly toward the horizon. Janna hasn't slept in 3 days. She's been decoding the last transmission captured by the remnants of the Borealis network. The signal was faint, buried beneath terabytes of magnetic noise, but inside it, she found something no one expected, a message. Not words, but structure. A recursive algorithm identical to human DNA compression sequences. When translated through genetic mapping, it forms instructions, not for communication, but for construction. It's not talking to us, Janna murmurs into the recorder. It's rebuilding itself through us. She uploads the decrypted code to an isolated drive and looks out toward the horizon. The sea glows faintly violet beneath the aurora, like it's lit from below. She knows she shouldn't open the last file, the one marked reinitiation sequence pending, but curiosity wins. The file loads, and on her screen appears a single line of text. Phase 2 acknowledged. Synchronization complete. The hum outside deepens. Glass trembles. Somewhere beneath the ice, something responds. Meanwhile, across the planet, small things begin to happen. In Tokyo, streetlights flicker in harmonic rhythm, 11.7 Hz. In Chile, the Cerro Tololo Observatory loses contact with 3 of its telescopes simultaneously. In Nairobi, people stop mid-step, eyes unfocused, murmuring in unison. The same syllables. The same cadence. It's global now. The resonance has reached critical coherence. January 1, 2027. Midnight UTC. All seismographs on Earth register a single, simultaneous spike, not an earthquake, but a vibration. The magnetic field oscillates. Radio communication fails. For 4.2 seconds, every human EEG on the planet records the same pattern, the Borealis waveform. Everywhere. Every mind, synchronized for the first and only time. Then silence. Total silence. No wind. No birds. Even the ocean's calm. When systems finally reboot hours later, astronomers notice something impossible. The moon's orbital inclination has shifted by 0.03 degrees. Not enough to destroy tides, but enough to suggest an external force, something massive, coordinated, deliberate. In the days that follow, new patterns begin to appear in the upper atmosphere. Not auroras. Not satellites. Geometries, concentric lattices of faint light, slowly rotating in unison with Earth's magnetic poles. And beneath them, at the deepest points of the ocean, hydrophones begin to pick up responses. A new frequency. Lower. Slower. 9.3 Hz. The resonance has changed here. Dr. Odegaard's final report, timestamp, January 4, 2027. If anyone finds this, it wasn't an invasion. It was an activation. We were never the observers. We were the medium. The message was never to us, it was through us. And now, it's awake. Recording ends. The file cuts to static. Then, for exactly 0.7 seconds, the static forms an image. Not a face, not this time, but a map. The map of Earth. And on every continent, Glowing nodes of light, hundreds, thousands, forming a single pattern. A circle, closing. The last frame fades to black. Then, one final line of data scrolls across the screen, its origin unknown. Convergence, T00:00:00. And then, nothing. No explosion. No collapse. Just silence. A silence that feels alive.
When 3I/Atlas is moving through the inner solar system during a period of increasing solar activity, what to expect physically, what should observers pay attention to, and why it is important. Review. 3I/Atlas is an interstellar comet. Designation begins with 3I, passing through the inner solar system on a hyperbolic trajectory. Since it did not form in the solar system, its composition, variability, and physical structure may differ from most local comets. Increasing solar activity, increased EUV flux, more frequent CME emissions and high-speed fluxes, more variable interplanetary magnetic field, has a strong effect on cometary formations and tails due to increased photoionization, plasma interactions, and radiation forces. Why does increased solar activity matter for a comet? The rates of photoionization and photodissociation increase with increasing EUV/ZUV flux, changing the balance of neutral and ionized particles in the coma and accelerating the formation of an ion tail. Coronal mass ejections, CME, interplanetary shocks, and large intersections of the heliospheric current layer change the local speed of the solar wind, density, and orientation of the magnetic field. They cause sudden plasma phenomena in comet tails, separation events, reconfiguration, and short-term brightness increases. Increased radiation pressure and heating can increase dust formation or cause fragmentation of structurally weak or volatile-rich bodies. Physical effects and observed signs. Ion tail reaction. Separation events. The CME or the boundary of the magnetic sector can lead to reconnection in the ion tail of the comet, leading to a visible rupture or separation of the tail segment, which is moving downstream. This is one of the clearest signs of space weather. Rapid reorientation or broken morphology. Changes in the direction of the IMF, interplanetary magnetic field, change the direction of the ion tail on scales from hours to days. Changes in ionic composition. Increased photoionization changes the balance of ions, for example, more CO+ or H2O+ compared to neutral substances, and can change the ratio of lines in the spectra. Neutral coma and dust. Brightness fluctuations. Increased heating and the activity of sunlight can increase the release of gases. Temporary lightning, or, conversely, fragmentation and erosion can lead to short-term emissions of dust, which then disappear. Morphology of the dust tail. A change in radiation pressure and a sudden release of dust create synchronous/syndine patterns that may indicate the time of the release and the size of the particles. Fragmentation. Heating or pulsed effects can lead to splitting. Fragments can form their own comas and move along slightly different trajectories, detectable astrometrically. Non-gravitational accelerations. Increased gas emission leads to noticeable non-gravitational effects on the core. Tracking these effects limits production volumes and active zones. Spectral characteristics. Stronger emission lines of ionized particles, CO+, H2O+, N2+, if present, radicals such as Cn, C2, C3, and atomic lines in the UV/optical range. The relative intensity of radiation may differ for comets of the solar system. Polarization and properties of dust. Polarimetric changes may indicate changes in the composition or granulometric composition of dust as a result of dust emission caused by sunlight, or its aging under the influence of solar radiation. Recommended observation strategy. Operational coordination with solar observatories. Monitoring of coronagraphs and heliospheric tomographs, SOHO/LOSCO, stereo, solar orbiter, Parker Solar Probe, where possible, to detect emissions and shocks on the trajectory crossing the comet. Compare time and location to predict interaction intervals. Multi-wave monitoring, the order of priorities depends on the available means. Optical broadband imaging to determine the overall morphology and brightness changes. High-frequency visualization when predicting the intersection of a CME or sector. Comet narrowband filters, CN, C2, C3, continuum, for separating gases from dust. Spectroscopy, optical/near-infrared/ultraviolet, to measure parent and daughter species, ion lines, and isotope ratios where possible, e.g., D/H if the S/N ratio allows. UV, HST or UV spectrographs, to quantify OH, H, and other photodissociation products and measurement of the photoionization rate. Radio/submillimeter, e.g. ALMA, IRAM, single band, for detecting initial volatiles such as CO, CO2, intermediate lines, HCN, and for limiting core activity. Local solar wind monitors, use ACE, SCOV, solar orbiter, and PSP data to determine the local plasma context and time of occurrence of disturbances. Frequency and time. Increase the rotation frequency around the predicted solar events and at a time when the comet is at a distance of 1 to 2 Australian dollars from the Sun, where the solar effect is strongest. Fast shooting even one night before/after an event can capture a disconnect or reorganization. After connecting/reappearing, perform thorough monitoring immediately to identify any changes missed during the break. Astrometry and long-term photometry. Frequent astrometry to detect non-gravitational accelerations and isolate dust and gas effects on the visible position. Photometry with a long baseline to track the evolution of activity. Scientific results and why they are important. Plasma physics. CME's documented interaction with an interstellar comet would provide a unique laboratory for magnetic reconnection, ion capture, and mass gain under various volatile compositions. Composition analysis, spectroscopic detection, or absence, of common and unusual volatiles limits the conditions of formation and processing in another planetary system. Differences in component ratios or isotopes can affect the chemical composition of planetesimals and the thermal history. Dust and core structure, the rate of dust formation, grain sizes, and fragmentation patterns reveal the mechanical strength and evolutionary state of the body, the key to understanding how interstellar objects survive ejection and transit. Population context, composition and physical behavior compared to 1I/Oumuamua and 2I/Borisov will help to create an empirical picture of the diversity of small interstellar bodies. Uncertainties and caveats. Line of sight and projection. The geometry of the tail unit strongly influences the morphology of the tail unit. Visible kinks or kinks can sometimes be projection effects. Polygonal views, spaceship plus Earth, help to eliminate ambiguity. Data gaps, solar conjunctions or poor coverage may obscure temporal events, so archive searches and cross-correlation with solar data are necessary. Comet variability. Comets may exhibit flares or fragmentation unrelated to solar exposure. Establishing a cause-and-effect relationship requires comparing time with independent measurements of the solar wind. Practical recommendations for observers and communicators. If you have time to work with the telescope, prioritize narrowband gas images and spectroscopy during the expected interaction intervals and maintain at least nighttime images during the perihelion passage. If you are on a space mission to observe the Sun, archive and mark CMEs that may overlap with the ephemeris of the comet, publish alerts in almost real time so that comet observers can respond. To attract public attention, use the before and after image sequences and explain the physics of tail separation using simple diagrams. these events make excellent visual stories linking solar activity and the science of small bodies. HiRISE planned for October 3, 2025, then comet lost to solar conjunction until December 2025, covering what HiRISE could have done, why the conjunction prevented observation, what was missed, how to reconstruct what happened during the gap, why activity may peak after the conjunction, and a detailed post-reappearance monitoring plan. What HiRISE could have measured on October 3, 2025. Spatial resolution and targets. HiRISE on MRO can achieve 0.25 to 0.3 m/pixel at typical Mars mapping altitudes. At realistic comet distances from Mars that day, tens to hundreds of millions of km, resolution will be far coarser but still much higher than ground seeing, able to constrain coma structure on 10s, 100s of km scales, depending on range. Key targets: detect compact nucleus or bright condensation, resolve multiple fragments separated by tens of km, image localized jets/active areas emerging from the nucleus, map inner coma brightness gradients and dust fans. Science measurements possible. Direct imaging of fragmentation or nascent fragments, measure their positions and relative velocities. Resolve dust jets and measure position angles to infer rotation phase and active regions. High-quality astrometry tied to the image field to constrain non-gravitational accelerations. Time series imaging during a single MRO pass to detect very short-term variability, rotation or short outbursts. Operational constraints HiRISE would follow. Short exposure times to avoid smear, use of red and, where available, color channels to distinguish dust continuum from gas-scattered light. Multiple exposures to enable cosmic ray rejection and to stack for faint structure detection. HiRISE planned for October 3, 2025, then comet lost to solar conjunction until December 2025, covering what HiRISE could have done, why the conjunction prevented observation, what was missed, how to reconstruct what happened during the gap, why activity may peak after the conjunction, and a detailed post-reappearance monitoring plan. What HiRISE could have measured on October 3, 2025. Spatial resolution and targets. HiRISE on MRO can achieve 0.25 to 0.3 m/pixel at typical Mars mapping altitudes. At realistic comet distances from Mars that day, tens to hundreds of millions of km, resolution will be far coarser but still much higher than ground seeing, able to constrain coma structure on 10s, 100s of km scales, depending on range. Key targets: detect compact nucleus or bright condensation, resolve multiple fragments separated by tens of km, image localized jets/active areas emerging from the nucleus, map inner coma brightness gradients and dust fans. Science measurements possible. Direct imaging of fragmentation or nascent fragments, measure their positions and relative velocities. Resolve dust jets and measure position angles to infer rotation phase and active regions. High-quality astrometry tied to the image field to constrain non-gravitational accelerations. Time series imaging during a single MRO pass to detect very short-term variability, rotation or short outbursts. Operational constraints HiRISE would follow. Short exposure times to avoid smear, use of red and, where available, color channels to distinguish dust continuum from gas-scattered light. Multiple exposures to enable cosmic ray rejection and to stack for faint structure detection. Why the conjunction prevented observation, and what conjunction means here. For ground-based and most Earth space assets, a solar conjunction means the comet's solar elongation became too small, close to the Sun on the sky, so it was not safely observable, daylight glare, very low contrast, and instrument safety/pointing limits block imaging. For typical observatories, elongations below 15-30 degree are effectively inaccessible. For MRO/HiRISE, two separate limits can block observations. If the comet's apparent position was too close to the Sun from Mars' viewpoint, HiRISE would be prevented from pointing for spacecraft safety reasons, direct or scattered sunlight into optics, thermal/stray light limits. Even if Mars had a usable Sun-comet separation, MRO operations constraints, e.g., uplink/downlink windows or avoidance of new commanding during mission events, can limit responsive observations. Practical effect in your scenario: the comet's geometry implied no safe, useful line of sight for Earth-based facilities, and HiRISE execution was either vetoed or impractical, producing a continuous observing gap until December. What was missed during the October-December gap? Time-critical transient events. Disconnection events or ion tail reconfiguration induced by CMEs or sector crossings. These can occur and evolve on hour-to-day timescales and are easy to miss. Short outbursts or fragmentation that occur and disperse within weeks, fragments that form and disperse below detection thresholds may be lost entirely. Baseline evolution. The rise, peak, and immediate post-peak decline of activity level, dust and gas production, a single gap of 2 months during perihelion/proximal passage can hide the activity maximum. Early development of recurrent jets tied to rotation, which allow rotation period determination, missed rotations reduce ability to link repeated morphology features. Orbital/physical constraints. Accurate measurement of non-gravitational accelerations across perihelion requires continuous astrometry. Gaps reduce precision and can bias derived outgassing parameters. Early fragmentation signatures that would explain later dynamical and photometric behavior remain undetermined. How to reconstruct what likely happened during the gap. Use solar observatory data to look for external drivers. Query SOHO/LOSCO, stereo coronagraphs, stereo/HI heliospheric imagers, solar orbiter and Parker solar probe datasets for CMEs, shocks, or dense streams timed to intersect the comet's predicted path. If a CME crossed the comet during the gap, it may explain a later reappearance signature, e.g., fragments or tail disconnection that becomes visible after conjunction. Use in situ solar wind monitors, ACE, SCOV, solar orbiter, PSP, to reconstruct IMF and dynamic pressure histories and identify likely interaction epochs. Re-examine spaceborne wide-field imagers. SOHO/LOSCO C3 sometimes registers comets close to the Sun even when ground telescopes cannot. Stack and difference imagery to search for faint signature of the comet during the gap. Stereo imagers likewise can sometimes capture comets that are in Earth's blind zone. Archival stacking of near-conjunction observations. Check small aperture solar coronagraphs and heliospheric imagers for faint traces, temporal stacking, along predicted ephemeris, improve sensitivity to faint, extended emission. Model-based inference. Use preconjunction photometry and activity trends to extrapolate expected gas/dust release, then compare to post-conjunction observations to test for anomalous enhancements, outbursts, or drops. Run thermal diffusion models to check whether thermal lag or surface sublimation wave propagation predicts a delayed peak in activity after closest approach. Why activity might peak after reappearance, physical reasons. Thermal lag in cometary material. Heat penetrates slowly into porous, low-conductivity nucleus material. Peak sublimation of deeper volatiles, e.g., CO, CO2, can lag insolation peak by weeks or months, producing a delayed activity maximum. Progressive exposure and delayed fragmentation. Surface erosion or progressive weakening from perihelion heating can trigger fragmentation after the closest approach, producing a sudden large rise in dust brightness that is only visible when geometry allows. Solar wind/space weather forcing during conjunction. A strong CME or a sequence of solar wind disturbances during the gap can strip volatiles or trigger mass loss episodes that produce enhanced dust/gas release once the comet reappears. These interactions may not be visible until the coma expands back into sunlight and becomes detectable. Viewing geometry and phase effects. A peak in observable brightness can occur when phase angle or Earth/Mars distance becomes more favorable even if intrinsic production peaked earlier. Concrete post-reappearance observing plan, first 0 to 3 weeks urgent, then 3 to 12 weeks follow-up. Immediate priorities, first 0 to 72 hours. High-cadence imaging, daily or better if possible, with 1 to 4 M-class telescopes to capture early morphology and any residual short-lived fragments. Use broadband for S/N and narrowband comet filters, CN, C2, dust continuum, to separate gas/dust. High-resolution imaging with HST/HiRISE, if still possible, to look for nucleus fragments and inner coma structure. Request rapid triggering if the object looks active. Spectroscopy, optical/near-IR, to measure gas emission lines, CN, C2, C3, NH2, H2O proxies, CO, and search for changes in composition compared to preconjunction spectra. Fragment search, PSF subtraction and image differencing. Stack frames shifted to predicted fragment motions to enhance S/N for faint fragments. Orbit non-gravitational forces, fit astrometry including standard non-gravitational parameterization, A1, A2, A3 or more advanced models, before and after conjunction, compare to test for impulsive events. Composition, derive production rates from spectroscopic line fluxes, correct for fluorescence efficiencies, and compare species ratios to preconjunction values and to 1I/2I benchmarks. Solar context correlation, time tag all observed changes and compare against heliospheric/CME timeline to test causation versus coincidence. Contingency and archival searches. If rapid reactivation is not detected, do deep stacked imaging at predicted ephemeris to place strict upper limits on nucleus size or low-level activity. Search SOHO/stereo/solar orbiter archives during the gap for any weak detections or transient features. These can anchor models of activity timing even if ground assets miss them. A short checklist for observers at reappearance. Night 0 to 3, broadband imaging, R/I, narrowband gas filters, CN/C2, spectroscopy, astrometry. Week 1, ALMA/MM slot if volatile suspected, HST/high-res imaging request if fragmentation suspected. Week 1 to 4, daily photometry if actively changing, otherwise every other night, polarimetry twice weekly if resources allow. Ongoing, maintain coordinated log of solar wind/CME events from solar mission feeds. The lost high-rise observation and the conjunction gap matter, what key science questions are enabled by those observations, and how recovered data after reappearance can still address major problems in cometary science and solar/heliospheric physics. High-level significance. Comets are primitive solar system bodies. High-quality observations across perihelion probe volatile inventories, surface and subsurface structure, and processes that drive mass loss and evolution. Missing time-critical data around perihelion reduces our ability to link instantaneous processes, outbursts, fragmentation, jet activation, to longer-term evolution. A high-resolution dataset from a spacecraft camera like HiRISE offers spatial detail and vantage geometry unavailable from most ground facilities. That detail is crucial for resolving small fragments, jets, and inner coma structure that reveal nucleus heterogeneity and mechanical properties. Key science questions enabled by the lost observations. 1. Nucleus properties and heterogeneity. What is the nucleus effective size, shape, and albedo? Are there active patches or pervasive diffuse activity? Do jet sources map to distinct terrains, e.g., cliffs, pits, implying localized volatile reservoirs or structural weakness? 2. Activity drivers and thermal physics. Which volatiles are driving the observed activity near perihelion, H2O versus CO/CO2? How does activity evolve with changing insolation and internal thermal lag? How does porosity, thermal inertia, and layering control delayed activity peaks or post-perihelion fragmentation? 3. Fragmentation mechanics and evolution. Did fragmentation occur? If so, what fragment size distribution, separation velocities, and timing? Are fragments monolithic or rubble? Fragmentation constrains tensile strength and internal stress regimes, critical for models of comet survival and dust production. 4. Dust properties and production. What are the dust size distribution, mass loss rates, and grain velocities? How do these depend on nucleus activity and solar forcing? Dust composition and morphology, via polarimetry/spectroscopy, inform models of primordial aggregation and alteration. 5. Non-gravitational forces and orbital evolution. How much do outgassing forces alter the orbit? Accurate astrometry before/after perihelion is required to constrain non-gravitational parameters, A1/A2/A3, and to model future dynamical evolution. 6. Solar wind and heliospheric interactions. Did a CME or solar wind enhancement during conjunction trigger tail disconnection, enhanced sputtering, or mass loss events? That ties cometary response to heliophysics and plasma interaction models. 7. Comparative and evolutionary context. Is this comet typical of its dynamical class, Oort cloud, LPC, JFC? Data informs population synthesis, mass loss lifetimes, and the delivery of volatiles to the inner solar system. Why HiRISE, and similar spacecraft, are uniquely important. Spatial resolution and inner coma access. HiRISE can resolve inner coma structures and relatively small-scale jets or fragments that ground telescopes may blur out, especially when the comet is near Mars vantage geometry. Different solar phase/parallax. Observations from Mars orbit provide a different phase angle and parallax relative to Earth, useful for 3D coma reconstruction when combined with Earth data. Short integration snapshots with high S/N on bright inner coma regions let us detect compact condensations, fragments, and measure their trajectories precisely. Specific measurable quantities and how they constrain theory. Nucleus radius and albedo constrains nucleus mass, gravitational binding energy, and survival thresholds for fragmentation. Active area fraction and jet geometry constrains whether activity is localized, pits/cliffs, or global, sublimating mantle, which ties to volatile layering models and transport models, e.g., sublimation fronts. Production rates Q, H2O, Q, CO, Q, CO2 relative abundance ratios set formation and thermal history constraints, e.g., CO-rich comets imply colder formation regions or preserved supervolatiles. Dust mass loss rate and grain size index, power law slope key inputs to mass loss budgets and meteoroid stream production, grain size affects coma brightness and radiation pressure evolution. Fragment separation velocities and size distribution, constrain fragmentation mechanisms, rotational breakup versus thermal stress versus impact, and help estimate mass lost in discrete events. Non-gravitational parameters, A1, A2, A3 feed into dynamical models predicting future perihelia, potential meteoroid stream evolution, and risk assessments for spacecraft/planetary encounters. Temporal light curve, AF, and morphology changes, help separate steady sublimation from impulsive events. Temporal derivatives can be compared to thermal diffusion models to infer subsurface diffusivity and layering. Broader scientific impacts. Solar system formation and volatile delivery. Volatile inventories and dust composition inform theories of volatile delivery to the terrestrial planets and chemical inheritance from the protosolar nebula. Small body mechanical properties. Fragmentation and activity studies refine our understanding of small body tensile strength, porosity, and structure, critical for interpreting rubble pile models and for small body mission planning, landers, sample return. Heliophysics synergy. Timely detection of cometary responses to CMEs or solar wind streams helps quantify plasma, neutral coupling and can provide in situ-like probes of the solar wind at comet locations. Planetary defense and risk assessment. Understanding fragmentation and sudden mass loss is crucial for predicting the behavior of potentially hazardous small bodies and for designing mitigation strategies. Consequences of the missed high-rise window. Scientific losses. Loss of inner coma morphology at a critical time reduces ability to detect small, newly formed fragments and measure their separation vectors close to formation. Best chance to measure low relative velocities. Map jet origins on the nucleus and directly connect jets to surface features. Obtain high-precision short baseline astrometry that reduces uncertainties in non-gravitational modeling across perihelion. While many ground and space assets can mitigate some losses, the unique combination of resolution and vantage offered by high-rise is not fully replaceable. How recovered observations can still address major science goals. Immediate multi-wavelength follow-up can detect delayed peaks, thermal lag or fragmentation, measure composition, and capture fragment evolution at later stages. Solar/heliospheric datasets can identify external drivers during the gap. Combined modeling and observed post-gap signatures can attribute causes to effects even when direct imaging is missing. Longitudinal studies, pre- versus post-conjunction, still allow estimates of total mass loss, composition, and evolution, albeit with increased uncertainty on timing and impulsive events. Prioritized science objectives if reappearance is detected. 1. Establish activity state and search for fragments immediately, high priority. 2. Secure spectroscopy, optical/NIR and MM/SUB, to measure volatile production and compositional changes. 3. Intensive astrometry for orbit and non-gravitational force constraints. 4. High-resolution imaging requests, spacecraft/HST, if fragmentation or unusual morphology is present. 5. Polarimetry and dust size diagnostics to detect fresh ejecta and constrain grain properties. Below are concrete, prioritized observational actions to take during the current conjunction/gap, what can still be done now, and the actions to take immediately after re-emergence. Each item gives the goal, why it's high priority, suggested instruments/modes, cadence, and triggers for escalation. Observational priorities now, during conjunction/when direct imaging from Earth may be impossible. 1. Monitor the heliospheric environment, highest priority. Goal: detect CMEs, high-speed streams, solar wind conditions that could have impacted the comet during the gap. Why? Many comet responses, tail disconnections, enhanced sputtering, impulsive activity, are driven by solar wind/CME interactions. Knowing the timing of any heliospheric disturbance allows attribution even without direct imaging. Suggested resources: Soho-Lasco/C2/C3 coronagraphs, stereo HI/SECI imagery, SCAVR ACE solar wind monitors, Parker solar probe, if data relevant. Use coronagraph movie sequences and CME catalogs. Cadence: continuous/real-time monitoring, extract CME onset times and wind parameter time series for the comet's position. 2. spacecraft coronagraph/inner heliosphere imagers, if geometry allows. Goal: detect the comet itself in white light coronagraphs/heliospheric imagers if it traverses their fields, especially stereo HI. Why? Even low-resolution detections constrain timing of major brightening or fragmentation events. Cadence: check archived near real-time images covering the conjunction interval, request higher-rate products if available. 4. Maintain precise ephemeris and planning preparations. Goal: update orbit predictions accounting for non-gravitational uncertainty, prepare acquisition sequences for reappearance. Why? Small ephemeris errors compound over the gap. Having pre-computed pointing mosaics will save critical time on recovery nights. Actions: produce mosaics for likely reappearance windows, produce finder charts in multiple filters, compute expected brightness scenarios for planning exposure times. 5. Solicit and organize rapid response observing networks. Goal: coordinate ground networks spanning longitudes to maximize reappearance chances. Why? Reappearance may occur at low elongations. A distributed network increases chance someone sees it quickly. Actions: alert amateur/professional networks, CBAT, MPC, Comet telegrams, AVSO, prepare standard reporting formats for quick astrometry/photometry. Observational priorities immediately after reemergence, first detection to first 1 to 2 weeks. These are the critical measurements to obtain as soon as the comet is visible again. Prioritize in this order. 1. Rapid discovery confirmation and astrometry, within hours of first detection. Goal: get multiple astrometric positions to secure the orbit and reduce ephemeris uncertainty. Why? Precise orbit allows rapid pointing for follow UPS and constraining non-gravitational forces introduced during the gap. Instrument/mode: any telescope with good plate scale and time, even small telescopes are valuable immediately, deliver positions to the MPC promptly. Cadence: multiple observations across the first night and nightly for the first week. 2. High-resolution imaging, first possible night, highest priority if nucleus/fragments suspected. Goal: detect and resolve any new fragments, asymmetries, jets, or morphological signs of disruption. Below are concrete, prioritized observational actions to take during the current conjunction/gap, what can still be done now, and the actions to take immediately after reemergence. Each item gives the goal, why it's high priority, suggested instruments/modes, cadence, and triggers for escalation. Observational priorities now, during conjunction/when direct imaging from Earth may be impossible. 1. Monitor the heliospheric environment, highest priority. Goal: detect CMEs, high-speed streams, solar wind conditions that could have impacted the comet during the gap. Why? Many comet responses, tail disconnections, enhanced sputtering, impulsive activity, are driven by solar wind/CME interactions. Knowing the timing of any heliospheric disturbance allows attribution even without direct imaging. Suggested resources: SOHO-LASCO/C2/C3 coronagraphs, stereo HI/SECI imagery, SCAVR ACE solar wind monitors, Parker solar probe, if data relevant. Use coronagraph movie sequences and CME catalogs. Cadence: continuous/real-time monitoring, extract CME onset times and wind parameter time series for the comet's position. 2. Spacecraft coronagraph/inner heliosphere imagers, if geometry allows. Goal: detect the comet itself in white light coronagraphs/heliospheric imagers if it traverses their fields, especially stereo HI. Why? Even low-resolution detections constrain timing of major brightening or fragmentation events. Cadence: check archived near real-time images covering the conjunction interval, request higher-rate products if available. Why? Inner coma structure and newly formed fragments are best detected at earliest epoch, small separation, highest S/N. Instruments, HST, if possible via 2, adaptive optics on large ground telescopes, VLT/sphere, Keck/NIRC2, Gemini with AO, or high-rise if spacecraft opportunities exist. Filters/modes, broadband R or I for morphology, short exposures to avoid coma saturation, consider coronagraphic setups if nucleus very bright. Cadence, as soon as detection confirmed, then daily for at least the first week if activity or fragments are present. 3. Broadband and narrowband photometry, first night and nightly. Goal, measure total brightness, AF, and track rapid brightness evolution. Why? Light curve reveals impulsive outbursts, steady sublimation, and roughly constrains dust production. Filters, standard broadband V, R, I, narrowband comet filters, HB filters, if available for gas/continuum separation, CN, C2, C3, BC, RC. Cadence, nightly, with higher cadence, multiple times per night, if rapid changes occur, combine large and small telescopes to avoid saturation and maintain continuity. 4. Medium-resolution optical and NIR spectroscopy, first possible night and repeat. Goal, measure gas species, CN, C2, C3, NH2, O, and continuum slope, detect H2O, CO2 proxies, near IR, where possible. Why? Composition before versus after conjunction reveals whether different volatiles dominated activity during the gap or if compositional changes occurred due to surface stripping/fragmentation. Instruments, VLT/X shooter, Keck/DIMOS or LRAS, optical, Gemini/NIRS, IRTF/SPX, NIR, JWST or NEOWISE if scheduling allows, space IR ideal. Spectral resolution, are 1000, 5000 sufficient to measure bands and line fluxes, higher resolution for velocity structure if S/N allows. Cadence, initial spectrum at discovery, repeat within days and weekly thereafter during evolution. 5. Sub/mm observations of volatiles, within days to week. Goal, measure CO, HCN, CH3OH lines to quantify volatile production and search for supervolatile-driven activity. Why? CO/CO2-driven activity near perihelion or during thermal events leaves distinct signatures. Mass loss budgets require these numbers. Instruments, ALMA, IRAM 30M, APEX, SMA. Cadence, first observation as soon as the comet is in a usable sky position, repeat weekly or triggered by activity. 6. Polarimetry, early post-reappearance window. Goal, measure dust polarization as a function of phase angle and wavelength. Why? Polarization is sensitive to grain size, structure, compact versus fluffy, and freshness of dust, important to detect fresh ejecta from fragmentation. Instruments, VLT/FIRS2 polarimetry, not /LFOSC polarimetry, other polarimeters on medium/large telescopes. Cadence, early single epoch then repeat as the phase angle changes and after any suspected outbursts. 7. Intensive astrometry orbit modeling, continuous during first month. Goal, constrain non-gravitational parameters, A1, A2, A3, introduced during the gap and refine future trajectory predictions. Y. Determines whether there was a significant momentum impulse, rapid outgassing, fragmentation, and improves ability to request future observations. Cadence, multiple astrometric points nightly if possible for first 1 to 2 weeks, then regular tracking. 8. High cadence follow-up if fragments or rapid brightening detected, hours, days. Trigger, resolved fragments, multiple nuclei, sudden magnitude jumps, greater than 0.5 mag/short interval, or unusual coma morphologies. Actions upon trigger. Increase imaging cadence to hourly when feasible, for the first 24 to 72 hours. Frequent astrometry of fragments to measure separation vectors and velocities, multiple times per night. Black small square rapid spectroscopy of fragments and surrounding coma to check for compositional differences. Black small square request urgent HST or AO imaging if not yet obtained. Observational priorities in the medium term, weeks to months after re-emergence. 1. Continued multi-wavelength monitoring of gas and dust production. Track integrated Q, H2O, Q, CO, Q, CO2 proxy, AF, and dust-to-gas ratio with a cadence optimized to the comet's evolution, weekly by weekly. 2. Morphology evolution and dust dynamics. Map dust tail structures, synchrones/syndines modeling to recover grain size distributions and ejection velocities. 3. Thermal and photometric phase function studies. Measure nucleus/near nucleus brightness when coma contribution is minimal, late epochs, to estimate nucleus size and albedo. 4. Long baseline polarization and spectroscopic campaigns. Look for post-outburst changes in dust properties or the appearance/disappearance of volatile bands. Observational modes and technical guidance, practical details. Astrometry, aim for S/N greater than 10 per centroiding exposure, use non-saturated frames, provide UTC timestamps and calibration frames. Photometry, measure AF, use small aperture radii and correct for seeing, report aperture sizes and solar phase corrections. Narrowband, when possible use HB filter set, CN 388 nanometers, C2 514 nanometers, C3 405 nanometers, BC/RC continuum, otherwise approximate with broadband color indices and continuum subtraction. Spectroscopy, aim for absolute flux calibration, standard stars, to convert line fluxes to production rates using Hazer or vectorial models, report slit width and position angle. mm/sub, velocity resolution 0.1, 0.5 km/s useful for outflow velocity, absolute calibration critical for production rate estimates. Polarimetry, report phase angle and wavelength. Use small apertures or radial profiles to separate nucleus versus coma polarization. Data products to prioritize for rapid sharing. Astrometry, MPC format, within hours of observation. Quick look calibrated images and photometry, magnitude, aperture radius, AF, posted to communal channels. Spectral line fluxes and production rate estimates with uncertainty estimates. Fragment positions and relative astrometry, nucleus versus fragment, for orbit/dynamics modeling. Decision rules/triggers that change priorities. Fragment detection or multiple nuclei, immediate highest priority imaging, astrometry, and spectral characterization. Rapid brightening, 0.5, 1 mag within 24H move to sub-hour cadence imaging and immediate spectroscopy, alert 2 facilities. Strong change in non-gravitational acceleration from initial orbit solutions, increase astrometric frequency and dynamical modeling. CME or solar wind event coincident with reappearance, prioritize coordinated plasma and remote sensing follow-up, and look for tail disconnections. Coordination, communications, and logistics. Rapid reporting, submit astrometry to the MPC and post quick notices on CBET/MPC/Comet discussion lists and social/professional networks to enable community follow-up. Centralize data, use a shared repository, institutional or community, for quick look products and reduce duplicative effort. Observation handoffs, Plan longitudinal handoffs between observatories to maintain continuous coverage during the first critical days. If you want, I can produce a one-page to-request template for HST/KEC/VLT/ALMA highlighting the immediate priorities and exact exposure/filter recommendations tailored to estimated brightness. Generate an example nightly observing sequence, exposure times, filters, cadences, for a given telescope aperture and expected magnitude. Provide the expected post-conjunction magnitude or the telescope you have access to and I'll tailor it.